the Imperial Era from scratch. This video is purely for entertainment and does not infringe on copyrights or laws. The rights to the novel and image belong to the original author. We do not claim ownership. Don't like waiting and want to listen to this fanfic in full now? Subscribe to our Patreon, where you'll find the best fanfics. Chapter 376. Tony holds his waist and clenches his fist. Before meeting Magneto, David hadn't imagined things would go so smoothly. Seeing Magneto's Eric's attitude, David figured that even if he couldn't convince everyone to abandon their world-altering plan, he could at least bring a few surviving mutants to Winter City. Even if he could only bring a few, David would still be making a profit. The results were astonishing. Magneto actually convinced every surviving mutant, and Professor X, among the survivors, decided to move to Winter City. As for the world ravaged by the Sentinels, they didn't abandon it outright. The X-Men, led by Professor X, also wanted to save the ordinary people of the world. Besides starting a new life in Winter City, these mutants would also regularly travel to their original worlds to search for and rescue human survivors and bring them to Winter City. In fact, during the time David had been recruiting Kryptonians in the DC universe, Winter City's population had been growing. While not as rapid as before, the steady influx of people into the northern plains had meant that Winter City's total population had only just surpassed 100,000 in the past 2 months. Much faster than I expected. The rest of the Kingdom of Tiran is even more chaotic than previously anticipated. According to intelligence gathered from multiple sources, Tiran has been plunged into chaos. With the exception of the northern plains, almost all regions of the kingdom are engulfed in war. Even more terrifying, this unrest isn't solely the work of the temple. The temple has focused its efforts on the southern regions of Tiran, where numerous lords have rebelled and declared their independence. These lords, along with those who have remained loyal to the Tiran royal family, have sparked a war. Then, ambitious individuals, eager to capitalize on the situation, have thrown the western part of the kingdom, previously unaffected by the temple's influence, into chaos. These individuals, fleeing north under the guise of the royal family, have plunged neighboring lords into trouble, leaving them unable to focus on their own affairs and striving to annex every inch of the surrounding territory. Tiran's eastern region also has many rebellious lords, but rather than joining the temple or the Satarunma Empire, these lords have declared themselves independent kingdoms. These kingdoms haven't fought against each other, nor have they attacked neighboring powers. However, surrounding forces seized this legitimate opportunity and launched a suppression war, even though the Tiran royal family had issued no such order. Coupled with the ongoing war between the elves and the northern city of Iron Tree Keep, Tiran Kingdom entered a period of profound chaos. Compared to the chaotic east, west, and east regions, the situation in the north was relatively stable. At least the elves hadn't breached Iron Tree Keep, and its outer fortresses remained firmly guarded over the human territory, ensuring uninterrupted access to the north. Consequently, many seeking refuge from the war began to flock to the northern plains, home to the Tiran royal family and Winter City, the only peaceful haven in Tiran Kingdom. Countless people packed their bags and set off northward, bringing their families with them, including a small number of nobles. Winter City's population would continue to grow, and the more turmoil in the south, the faster it would grow. Even people from Iron Tree Keep began to flee to the northern plains, choosing to become citizens of Winter City. David's only task was to devour all the meat that was brought to him, while simultaneously transforming this energy into his own power, a more prosperous city and a stronger army. He reviewed the report in his hand. Although Winter City had previously connected Frostwatch and Snowfort through the construction of a road, technically the two locations were still isolated militarized garrisons. However, as more and more people moved to Winter City, especially those arriving from the south, some saw Snowfort as a good option for their new homes. This led to a gradual increase in the population of Snowfort, and Weatherby Swan had already applied to recruit a new group of junior staff to handle Snowfort's affairs. The original plan was for Snowfort and Winter City to eventually merge into one, becoming part of Winter City. However, his initial plan envisioned Winter City as the core, with development gradually radiating outward. The current situation was more like Winter City and Snowfort working together, ultimately converging. That's fine, as long as Snowfort's construction specifications meet Winterfort's standards. David had to sign the order mobilizing the diggers to Snowfort to build more infrastructure, including crucial facilities like the arc reactor. Therefore, the Lord's signature was required. After signing and stamping his work, David continued to imagine a brighter future. The Kryptonians were gradually adapting to their abilities and to life in Winterfort. The designs for the new armor of the Tiran Knights, the light cavalry, heavy cavalry, and super heavy cavalry, had been finalized, and prototype production had begun. Tony Stark took some time to review them, made some refinements, and then sent the blueprints back to Winterfort, along with some of his own suggestions for future upgrades. He had intended to return to continue researching the advanced science aboard Temple II, but David caught him red-handed and tasked him with developing surveillance and restraint devices for mutants. There's no rush to see the finished product, but I do need complete design drawings and samples. This thing is simple. Just add a module to the personal terminal I just made. Personal terminal? Have you been working on that lately? Tony flashed his watch. Yes, I've already made it. You know, I'm not that familiar with watch brands. He had heard of many famous watch brands, but only by name. He couldn't recognize them in person. Tony sighed helplessly. He wanted to give David some basic knowledge on the subject, but he felt that these earthly luxuries were meaningless to a great lord who could travel to multiple universes and possess the knowledge of cosmic civilizations. So he abandoned his original intention and got straight to the point, introducing David to the device in his hand. Did you mention the multifunctional portable personal terminal tool? David had always believed that this personal terminal, integrating the functions of a mobile phone, a personal computer, and an identity account, would become standard equipment for everyone in Winter City in the future. He glanced at Tony in surprise, his confident expression revealing the answer. You made it so quickly. It's not that complicated to begin with. Even with the skills I already possess, I could have built it with some time, let alone now. It was just a portable personal computer. Tony had already mastered technologies like holographic imaging and light sensing control. With access to the advanced cosmic technology stored within Sanctuary II, building something like this was as easy as assembling a new suit of armor. This thing isn't difficult to produce. It can be designed as a bracelet, watch, or ring, and there's definitely something for everyone. It's a shame it still doesn't allow for interdimensional communication, otherwise it would have made it much easier to connect in the future. David didn't complain that Tony was just daydreaming. After all, he was a genius with a knack for cheating. No one knew Tony's limits. Who knew if he'd succeed one day? Anyway, make a batch and give priority to the important people in Winterfell. With this device, they could abandon their old phone-like communicator. This personal terminal would be a perfect replacement. David himself requested a ring-shaped device, which, when worn on a finger, creates a holographic image of the hand it's worn on. It can be held in the palm of one's hand or projected onto the outside of one's forearm, and can be used with mental impulses, voice, or even direct touch. In fact, the fully functional personal terminal also possesses combat capabilities, such as releasing energy to form a shield for protection or condensing it into energy blades to attack enemies. Due to public security concerns, these features will be removed from future civilian versions. Oh, by the way, I heard mutants have joined Winterfell. Yes, so I added an extra module. What module? A mind intrusion detection and alarm system. Tony pointed to his watch. Mine has an additional defensive feature, but I don't think you'll need it. Those who can wield mystical powers possess considerable mental strength and are naturally resistant to mental intrusion. While Professor X is a mentally advanced expert, David is no ordinary holy light priest. He doesn't need additional defensive equipment. But Tony had to do this, and he began seriously considering how to strengthen himself. He noticed an increasing number of non-humans in Winterfell, and if things continued like this, he'd become increasingly weaker. He didn't mind being outmatched in combat. After all, his greatest pride wasn't fighting. What Tony couldn't accept was being constantly treated as a lesser civilization, especially with his frequent trips to Sovereign. Being looked at that way for so long inevitably led to some thoughts. So, if you have any urgent work coming up, tell me now. I'm going to focus on this research for the next while. Have you considered learning some mystical powers? That could also enhance your own abilities. Tony Stark possessed the talent and potential to become a sorcerer supreme, so learning magic was a sure thing. Tony's response was typical of him. Yes. They don't conflict. First, he'd use enhancement technology to adjust and strengthen his body, then learn mystical knowledge to master some extraordinary power. Barring any unexpected events, he'd 90% choose to learn how to wield arcane energy and become a mage. The remaining 10% depended on whether any unusual individuals would appear in David's area during this period. Chapter 377 Elf Village. Summer fades into autumn. Summer on the northern plains is mostly pleasantly cool, with a few exceptions. But with the arrival of autumn, the coolness gradually transforms into cool, chilly, and even a bit chilly. Short-sleeved t-shirts have gradually become coats and jackets, and genuine leather jackets have become a popular casual wear item in Winter City this year. David is wearing a brown leather jacket made by Penny Bloom Fashions. It's said that the material used is very rare, hunted in remote areas. Penny Bloom Fashions doesn't know, but the raw material supplier who transports the material from Frostwatch to Winter City may know something, but David knows more. The material for this jacket is actually purchased from orcs. Since the great cleanup of the northern plains, David's Winter Intelligence Department has once again discovered traces of orcs. However, unlike last time, the orcs found this time have no intention of attacking humans. They live in the barren, cold mountain forests northeast of the northern plains, relying on the few wild fruits and vegetables produced by the barren land and hunting for survival. Due to the harsh living environment, the number of individual orc groups is limited, forcing these orcs to live scattered across the region. Completely wiping out these orcs is no easy task, and David hasn't issued any orders to clear the northeastern mountainous forests. Through intelligence reports and some photographs, David recognized these orcs as the same ones he had purified by the holy light when he bombed the Orcish capital. He even saw a few familiar faces among them. Freed from the control of the Fel, these orcs seem to have no intention of reuniting with their original orcs, instead finding quiet corners to live. David, after all, wasn't a demon, and he didn't mind giving these orcs a chance. With Winter City's continued development and expansion, Winter City would have more opportunities to interact with these orcs, and it would depend on their choices. The Winter Knights were still working to convert all of their members into Paladins. The Tiran Knights had begun ranger training and had taken possession of prototypes of light and heavy cavalry systems, testing them while also teaching the Tiran Knights how to use them. David, Sophia, and Sutton took a look and discovered that the armor was already quite advanced. Barring any unexpected problems, mass production would begin this winter, and the entire Tiran Knights would be equipped with a new gear next year. As for transforming the entire order into rangers and hunters wielding arcane energy, it would likely take several years to fully complete. With the Tiran Knights armor issue resolved, a new challenge arose. Sylvanas sought to provide the entire order with a more accurate long-range weapon. While she personally preferred the bow, she wasn't opposed to equipping her trained men with firearms. The design and production of the flute multi-purpose rifle were officially put on the agenda. Simultaneously, the design of a new portable mechanical bow was also on the agenda. Ideally, the new mechanical bow should have comparable power to the flute multi-purpose rifle, allowing the Tiran Knights to choose a precise long-range weapon based on their preferences and strengths. As for melee weapons, needless to say, the melee cold weapons within Winterfell were constantly being optimized and upgraded. Firepower density and heavy firepower are handled by the heavy cavalry and super heavy cavalry systems. The fully armored Tiran Knights are a terrifying force, armed to the teeth. Furthermore, the mechanical pet and pet systems Howard mentioned earlier are also taking shape. A smaller version of the ghost drone used by RC will become the Tiran Knights' combat pets. Since this drone requires mind control, it will initially be accessible only to a small number of Tiran Knights with the necessary talent. While many issues remain to be resolved, at least the direction has been set, and the future looks bright. Sophia, the current leader of the Tiran Knights, often dreams of the day when she can lead the knights across the Bronia continent, completely destroy the temple, and avenge her two brothers. Excited, Sophia has aspired to strive to become a true Tiran Knight. Recently, she has been diligently studying various combat techniques and frequenting dungeons. Sophia went to the dungeons again. Her Royal Highness went there after breakfast. Belfast brought David a pot of hot tea. Belfast, already familiar with David's taste, always prepared the perfect tea and snacks for him. This is newly cultivated tea from Her Highness Helen's homeland. The Kingdom of Sparta was no longer just Winterfell's primary source of tea. Helen had also learned a great deal about the subject, having Sparta cultivate and produce various new varieties. Once a new product was created, it would be sent to Winterfell first. David took a sniff at the teacup. This newly cultivated tea smelled a bit like Iguanine tea, except it didn't need to be rinsed. Setting the still hot tea aside, David continued to read the materials, chatting casually with Belfast. Belfast, already firmly established as the butler of Glamorgan Castle, was quick to answer David's questions. Seeing this, David felt that Belfast's mere role as butler seemed a bit of a waste. Have you ever considered a position in the Navy, like Hood? After settling into life in Winter City, Hood officially joined the Winter Navy as its deputy commander. A few days ago, he and James Norrington, along with a group of sailors, set out on the newly renovated Missouri, heading west along the Winter River on the Winter Navy's first long-distance voyage. I already have a position in the Navy, and I'll be on the surface during battles. Belfast was a warship, after all. Technically, being a housekeeper was her sideline. Her true strengths were always sailing and fighting on the seas. Oh? What position? Flagship of the Winter Navy's 2nd Cruiser Division, Winter City only had 2 cruisers. One was Skyfire transformed. Now that the Missouri had sailed, Skyfire continued to guard the ship, the other was the Belfast before him. So, these two each occupied an entire fleet, right? Thinking of this, David remembered he still had a magic cube he hadn't used. Should he summon another humanoid warship? After all, there's no use for hoarding Rubik's cubes, and they won't multiply and produce smaller ones. Who should he choose? David's decision-making difficulties suddenly struck. With so many options, he was at a loss for words. He pondered the Rubik's cube for a long time, but ultimately came up with nothing. For quick and easy access, the most convenient options would be the honorable ships that have been converted into museums. The Essex-class Yorktown and Hornet are both very easy to find. Traveling to the world of the Walking Dead wouldn't even cause a stir. Of course, some sunken warships, like the Hood, could be summoned. Wasn't the Hood a battle wreck? Thinking that way, perhaps the Rubik's Cube could give those sunken ships new life. Traveling to the ocean floor wasn't too much of a hassle for David right now. Prince Eugen? Saratoga? Bismarck? Unfortunately, honorable ships like the Enterprise and the Warspite were dismantled after the war, leaving nothing behind. If they wanted to be summoned, they'd have to wait for the right world. How about keeping the cube and waiting, eh? David suddenly realized that he might be able to use the quantum realm of the Marvel Universe to travel to a parallel world at the appropriate time to summon his desired target. Sure enough, there are always more solutions than problems. He put the cube away again. This way, he could stop worrying and continue waiting for the quantum travel device. He had initially been interested in this technology to obtain the Soul Stone, but then he remembered that he could also use Peggy Carter to travel to her world and thus contact the Observer. There was a chance he could obtain the Soul Stone from the 6-Gem Ultron. If he weren't worried about being unable to defeat the 6-Gem Ultron, David would definitely consider this option the best choice. To be safe, it would be better to bully Thanos, who hadn't collected all the gems or was already seriously injured. After reviewing the remaining information, David prepared to explore the Marvel Universe. Since he had relatively free access to the worlds connected to Winterfell, he would occasionally go out to explore. He didn't seek anything, just to take a look. Kamar Taj was his most frequent destination, simply to observe up close how Steve trained Doctor Strange. Due to David's perverse taste, Stephen Strange was currently unaware of David's true identity, treating him as a mere ordinary Kamar Taj mage. He was only slightly off-duty, while the other Kamar Taj mages diligently studied and trained. David often wandered off, never once seen studying or training. David was about to go over to observe the excitement as usual, but before he could even get up and leave his office, Gareth Stanton arrived. Elves, yes, south of Winter City, to be precise, the west bank of the Iron River. David, looking at Gareth Stanton hurriedly reporting, carefully inquired about the situation, not missing a single detail, and finally ascertained the precise situation. Winter City had been undergoing extensive development, expanding its territory to the west bank of the Winter River and gradually expanding towards the west bank of the Iron River. Winter City had only established some infrastructure along the river and hadn't ventured far into the area. To ensure the safety of the territory, Gareth Stanton increased his daily patrols and deployed fighter jets and helicopters for more thorough reconnaissance. The reconnaissance aircraft then discovered the Elven village. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelis. There you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 378: The Orcs Return. An Elven village. David studied the holographic photo in his hand intently. It showed that the Elven village was perfectly obscured by trees, which was one of the reasons it was difficult to spot from the air and from a distance. Is it close to winter forest? Not really. The Iron River, flowing from the Iron Forest, flows north to join the Winter River, a considerable distance away. Furthermore, this village is located quite southwest, well outside Winterforest's usual surveillance area. If Winterforest hadn't built several bridges and expanded its infrastructure westward, its air force wouldn't have flown so far for reconnaissance, and even if they did, they would have focused on the nearby plains, making it difficult to spot an elven village perfectly protected by the forest. Are these also elves from the Iron Forest? Gareth couldn't come up with an answer. He didn't know the true nature of the elves within the Iron Forest. After all, he wasn't from Iron Forest. Furthermore, Winterforest's strategic focus had previously been on the orcs and the temple, with little attention paid to the elves. Even as Gareth pondered his response, David had already discerned some clues from the photos. These elves may not be the same faction as the elves currently fighting at Iron Tree Keep. David saw a puzzled look on the elves' faces in the photographs, as if they were sizing up some unknown object. The elves fighting at Iron Tree Keep had seen airplanes many times before. They knew these giant metal birds were human weapons, and wouldn't react this way to seeing an airplane. Come to think of it, the Iron Tree Forest is quite vast. The Iron Tree Forest borders the Tiran Mountains to the east and the Lost Lands to the west. No one can say for sure how many elves there are in this vast primeval forest. The humans of Iron Tree Keep assumed the elves were few, and David had originally assumed the same. It seems humans only encountered a fraction of them, and many more elves live a secluded existence deep within the Iron Tree Forest. Call Liandrin and Sylvanus over here. David pondered for a moment and decided to send Liandrin, the Grand Bishop of the Holy Light, to make some contact with these elves. Even if they couldn't gain detailed information about the elves, at least some basic information would be helpful. The reason for choosing these two was that their elves might be less wary. Furthermore, their strength was guaranteed. If an emergency arose, there was no need to worry about their safety. They would definitely hold out until reinforcements arrived, perhaps even wielding the enemy. When it came time to strike, these two would not hesitate, nor would they hold back just because their opponents were elves. After all, in their eyes, they were high elves from Azeroth. They were not the same race as the native elves of this world. The two elves quickly arrived at David's office. After a brief explanation of the situation, they understood why David had summoned them. I'm ready to leave any time. I need to go back to the church to make some arrangements. As a ranger general, Sylvanus was known for her decisiveness. Even though she still had the task of training the Knights of Tiran, the training schedule had already been established, so her absence wouldn't affect anything. Liandrin, on the other hand, needed to hand over her current work to the other priests before she could leave, but that wouldn't take long. Gareth will send a small group of Winter Knights and 2 priests to stand by on the Quinjet. The Quinjet would drop the 2 elves near the elven village and remain there, leaving the task of contacting the elves entirely to the 2 in front of him. After the 2 elves departed, David and Gareth discussed establishing a defensive outpost in that direction. With the rapid growth of Winter City, the garrison issue was becoming increasingly complex. As if feeling David had been having it too easy lately and determined to trouble him, Gareth had just left to formulate a new defense plan when new news arrived. The orcs are back, yes, and this time they're all green. David observed the orc soldiers in the photo, stored in a micro-device, playing a holographic image. They were noticeably different from the orc army he had previously repelled. The orcs in the photo were taller and more powerful, their muscles bulging, and some even sported terrifying bone spikes. That wasn't the worst part. Even more outrageous were the ships these orcs were aboard. They were ferociously Orcish, ironclad warships powered by some unknown power source, most likely Fel energy, and adorned with turrets. Wow! Last year, when they were driven back, they were still a backward race using catapults, and now they're sporting warships and cannons? That's not cheating, is it? Even if the gods had granted these orcs the knowledge, where did they get the resources? How did they create warships and cannons from scratch? David felt the urge to throw the display device to the ground. Are these gods too good to be true? Are they being shameless? The good news is, the orcs aren't numerous this time. Compared to David, Van Cleef seemed calm, even allowing enough time for the Duke to complain before continuing with his intelligence report. Furthermore, after landing on the eastern coast, these orcs didn't immediately charge towards Snow Forest. Instead, they retreated into the hilly and mountainous areas to the northeast. That area, David immediately understood what these orcs were up to. Are they rescuing their compatriots? I'm afraid not. Sir, at Van Cleef's prompting, David pulled up the last set of photos, which showed countless brown and yellow-skinned orcs in shackles, being escorted toward the coast by green-skinned orcs. More like a capture. After reviewing the photos, David leaned back in his office chair, frowning and pondering for a few seconds. Have you found out where these orcs are going? From what I've seen so far, the orcs are transporting all these prisoners south. South? Yes, down the coast. They didn't seem to intend to turn back until the scouts withdrew. David suddenly understood why the Tiran Empire had been so quiet after inciting several lords of the Tiran kingdom to revolt. Perhaps something was wrong in their own backyard. So, the orcs gleaned resources from the Tiran Empire to build these warships? David no longer dwelled on the source of this knowledge. Based on the information he currently possessed, he deduced that the orcs' arrival was a new round of purges targeting the Bronia continent. During each purge, the newly emerged race was considered the chosen one, blessed by the gods, capable of any and every feat. He wondered if the gods behind the orcs, realizing even this still proved insufficient to destroy Winter City, would offer even more outrageous gifts to the orcs. Would these almighty gods fear backlash from their pawns? It was an intriguing question, and David longed to know the answer, but it was difficult to see a clear outcome anytime soon. For now, he'd better address the immediate issue. The Knights of Winter can't stay home forever, they should go out and gain some combat experience. David's meaning was clear. The Northern Plains was their territory, and the orcs' unauthorized docking of warships within his, the Duke of Winter's, territory constituted an act of war. Winter City must strike back, to show the orcs who truly rules the Northern Plains. Furthermore, it could also test the strength of these newly mutated orcs. This was a key reason why he dispatched the Winter Knights, the strongest of the current forces, rather than other units. The order was issued, and the Winter Knights quickly sprang into action. They dressed, assembled, and marched. After long training sessions, the Winter Knights lived up to their title as an elite corps. Everything was executed flawlessly, transforming chaos into order in record time. Only after several Quinjet-produced Decepticons took flight did the others in the barracks realize what had happened. All members of the Winter Knights are out? What's going on? A squad left earlier. Did they run into trouble? We're heading in a different direction. We don't know who the enemy is? It's clear the Duke is taking this enemy seriously. What a shame. This battle won't have anything to do with our Tiran Knights. Your Tiran Knights haven't even finished equipping themselves with weapons and equipment yet. What's there to be said about? Didn't the Spartan Heavy Infantry Regiment receive orders? Perhaps the enemy is too far away. The discussions in the barracks quickly subsided. All the soldiers of the Winter Barracks were summoned to their respective combat conference rooms to watch the battle between the Winter Knights and the orcs. Even David, along with important officials from Winter City, sat in the conference room to watch the live broadcast. As 8 mass-produced Quinjet Decepticons crossed the northern plains and arrived at the eastern coast, the cameras on the Quinjet Decepticons gave everyone a clear view of the orcs and warships below. These orcs are getting uglier. Aren't these green-skinned orcs from the same group as the others? I don't know, maybe they're from another tribe? The soldiers' attention was varied. In the conference room at Castle Glamorgan, Tony, Howard, and the others were carefully observing the orc warships. It looks crude, isn't it worth worrying about? Even as they were discussing this, the orcs spotted the Quinjet in the air and launched an attack. Green energy beams blazed from the orc warships, and the thick black main guns, after adjusting their direction, slowly raised, unleashing even more terrifying energy shells. Seeing this, the once bustling conference room gradually quieted down. Chapter 379 The orcs become more fierce. Green energy shells streaked across the sky, repeatedly passing by the Quinjet. Thankfully, the mass-produced Quinjet Decepticons were skilled pilots, and none had yet managed to hit them. However, this chaotic situation also created some difficulties for the airborne drop. Increase altitude. Garrett wasn't leading the charge himself. Floyd was currently at Iron Tree Keep, responsible for forming Iron Tree's 1st Lancer Unit, and wasn't in Winterfell. The Winter Knights' frontline commander for this operation was Maddox Hawk. The former Snaufrest commander had been training with the Winter Knights since joining David's ranks, seeking opportunities to establish further merit. Today, he finally got his chance, but the opponent wasn't as easy as he'd expected. Fortunately, his extensive battlefield experience, combined with his recent diligent study, enabled him to react quickly and effectively. The Quinjet's increased altitude effectively avoided the orc anti-aircraft fire, though this also meant the airborne drop would be much longer. High-speed airborne. As the cabin door opened, Maddox activated his aura of devotion, granting his allies greater protection. Knights aboard several other Quinjet aircraft performed the same maneuver. As training continued, several paladins had already emerged from the Order of Winter. Besides the basic use of holy light, the aura of devotion was a must-have skill for these paladins. This, in addition to the inherent energy shielding of their blizzard power armor, was supplemented by the added defense of holy light, allowing them to completely ignore attacks and safely land on their designated battlefield. Winter is coming. With a series of chants, the Order of Winter leaped from the Quinjet one after another, each man instantly adjusting his stance to swiftly descend to the ground. Whoosh! 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 Maddox was the first to leap from the cabin, but his men had already adjusted their stances and passed him at astonishing speed. Only then did Maddox adjust to his stance and follow his men down at high speed. It wasn't that he was slow. The Winter Knight's airborne manual explicitly mandated that when forced to drop under enemy anti-aircraft fire, the commander must remain at the rear. To put it bluntly, in such situations, his men must act as human shields, ensuring he could land in optimal condition. By optimal condition, he meant his energy shields were intact, barely depleted. This also served to prevent unforeseen circumstances. What if the enemy suddenly unleashed some unforeseen weapon, instantly wiping out the frontline airborne units? Killing a single soldier might not be a big deal, but wiping out a commander directly on the front lines would negatively impact the morale of the entire unit, even if his replacement reacted quickly. Right now, Maddox could clearly see more and more green light and shells whizzing past him, while the men ahead of him occasionally exploded with green halos. Adjust attitude, begin deceleration. After descending to a certain altitude, Maddox controlled his power armor's posture, shifting from a vertical, high-speed descent to normal airborne stance. The power armor's main thrusters activated, quickly slowing the descent to a safe level. Within seconds, the Winter Knights landed. Safely landed, sir. Fire. Kill those damned orcs. Maddox felt the vibrations of his feet. The grounded feeling was like a command. Instinct, honed by hard training. He instantly aimed his assault rifle at the green-skinned orcs before him and pulled the trigger. Maddox showed no mercy to the orcs. After all, he had a long grudge against them. Even though the orc invasion had indirectly led him to join the Winter Knights, begin a new life, and even taught him the miraculous power of the Holy Light, he felt no gratitude towards them, only seeing them as ugly invaders. Boom boom boom. Thud 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 bang. The battlefield was filled with a dull thud of power armor landing, the relentless crackle of assault rifle fire, and the roar of exploding missiles. Some Winter Knights strategically adjusted their landings, landing on the orc warships. They immediately blasted the bridge to smithereens before attacking the turrets. The entire coastline became a battlefield. The Winter Knights' combat strategy emphasized multifaceted attack, with nearly every area battlefield. Each knight was equipped with powerful firepower capable of independently clearing a safe area. This remained true even when facing the remutated orcs. However, compared to the one-sided slaughter they had faced previously, the orcs now posed a threat. Assault rifles could still kill them, but as long as they weren't struck directly at vital points like the head or heart, they would ignore the damage and continue fighting. The weapons they wielded were accompanied by a green glow. These weapons, upon striking the blizzard power armor, would cause a violent surge in the energy shields, which would temporarily collapse if attacked repeatedly in a short period of time. Gather, form combat teams. Maddox, upon noticing the situation, immediately ordered the Winter Knights to gather nearby. Working in groups of 3 or 4 would better prevent accidents. He had barely finished issuing the order when an orc, draped in green skin and a physique even thicker than the surrounding orcs, covered in sharp bone spurs, suddenly rushed out from the front. Armored with a massive hammer, it slammed into the ground in front of Maddox, sending a wave of green ripples. The mere presence of the ripples caused his power armor to sound an alarm. Warning. Energy shield collapse. What? Startled, Maddox realized the attack wasn't over yet. Hidden in the cloud of dust, the hammer was coming down from the side. Instinctively, he raised his assault rifle to block, but the next second, a tremendous force was unleashed. Maddox, clad in his power armor, slid sideways over 10 meters, his assault rifle reduced to a pile of scrap metal. A sudden sharp pain came from his ribs. He knew that it was the armor automatically injecting him with a potion. His arms, which had lost sensation, quickly regained consciousness and he took out his melee weapon, a two-handed sledgehammer. After joining the Order of Winter and undergoing rigorous training, which continuously improved his own qualities, Maddox chose the sledgehammer as his melee weapon. Mobilizing the holy light in his body, the sledgehammer in his hand faintly emitted a hint of divine radiance. While observing the orc in front of him who was roaring to the sky, Maddox also took the opportunity to glance at the surrounding situation. His comrades had already gathered one after another. Ordinary orcs could not withstand the terrifying firepower of the Winter Knights. The one in front of him should be the top fighter among the orcs. And it is very likely that he is the commander of this orc group. Looks like I'm lucky. After a brief pause, the power armor's energy shield reactivated. Maddox swung his hammer and engaged the orc. Watching the scene before him, almost everyone's attention was focused on the orc battling Maddox. David observed carefully and realized that while the orc's strength was certainly impressive, the hammer in his hand was the real deal. As the fight progressed, the orc initially had the upper hand. Gradually, Maddox gained control and began to overpower the orc. The orc's strength was visibly declining, and the green light on the hammer faded until it vanished. The once powerful and formidable orc had shrunk considerably, his muscles noticeably shrunken, and he looked frail and exhausted, barely even standing. Maddox could have ended the fight long before, but after securing the upper hand, he received a direct order from the Duke to fight the orc a little longer and observe his condition. Maddox didn't stop until the orc was completely exhausted, barely standing there gasping for breath, leaning on his hammer. "Kill him, and don't touch the hammer directly." "Yes, my lord." A single blow from his hammer ended the orc warrior's life, and Maddox glanced around. While he was engaged in a fight with the orc, the battle around him had already ended. Under the saturating firepower, the orcs couldn't hold out for long, and despite the skillful coordination of the Winter Knights, the orcs still couldn't kill any of them. They managed to injure a few knights, but thanks to the combined protection of the paladins and healing potions, they managed to survive the most critical period. As a result, the battle was still a resounding victory with no casualties. Every greenskin orc was killed, not a single one escaped. One reason was that there was nowhere to escape. Even if they activated their warships, they couldn't get far under the Quinjet's pursuit and bombardment. Another point was that these green-skinned orcs had no intention of fleeing. Even at a complete disadvantage, they continued to charge, howling. Strong and valiant, armed with warship cannons and terrifying fell energy, the orcs seemed to have found another way to acquire fell energy. He noticed that some orcs used their weapons to kill captured orcs, and the green light on their weapons became even more intense. If killing orcs could increase fell energy, then could killing humans do the same? Would the orcs become stronger with each fight? Facing such a powerful orc army, how long could the Sodarinmer Empire hold out? Chapter 380, Stop Pretending and Show Your Cards. The world of Brunia is about to change. The orcs seemed destined to establish a foothold on Brunia. Perhaps when his Winterfell army marched south, they would no longer face the armies of other human kingdoms, but these green-skinned orcs. After watching the live broadcast of the battle, David looked at the others. Those present were all Winterfell's top brass, including Chief Advisor Tony Stark, who was also seated there, frowning as if lost in thought. "Tony, what are you thinking about?" "I'm thinking about the second edition of the Piccolo Assault Rifle." Judging from the live broadcast, the Piccolo Assault Rifle posed a reduced threat to the orcs, and he didn't want his research to become obsolete so quickly. "Considering I have a lot of mature technology now, it shouldn't be a problem." He was recruiting more and more talents, and with a sufficient stockpile of advanced technology, he could continuously transform these technologies into practical products, which would be enough to keep the Winterfell army operational until the Interstellar Era. Rather than weapons, he was more curious about the progress of Tony's research on enhancement technology. Sharing a common goal, Cordell recently joined Tony's research, pouring all his experience and knowledge into it. He had no choice but to do so. After seeing the enhancement technologies Tony possessed, all sourced from various forces across the universe, he realized his research wasn't truly fruitful. At best, it offered a unique perspective. "We've come up with several different proposals, and we're currently conducting preliminary comparisons. If all goes well, I'll begin preliminary preparations when winter arrives here. After these initial preparations, the actual enhancements will begin. If all goes well, Tony will become a highly intelligent being with a formidable body and a long lifespan by next spring." Who would still look at him with such scumbag eyes then? David, Upon hearing that Tony's human enhancement project was progressing smoothly, stopped asking further questions. He envisioned that all residents of Winter City would undergo enhancements, but initially, the military would be prioritized. Personal enhancements, holy light, arcane magic, advanced weaponry, and space battleships would form the complete Winter Army in David's mind. His original plan was to quietly cultivate these powerful strategies on the northern plains before launching a global sweep. Now it seemed difficult to implement this idea. He could continue to develop peacefully, but by the time he swept south, the entire continent would have been reduced to ruins by orcs wielding fell energy. What would be the point? For a while, Winter City needed to accelerate its development. Besides quickly building new towns and various naval facilities on the eastern coast, Winter City's influence must also be expanded southward. Iron Tree Fort could no longer remain in Marcus Morgan's hands. Furthermore, he needed to send personnel to the Thordarinmer Empire to inquire about the situation there. Issue a notice to all lords of the Kingdom of Tiran. David had made his decision, and some matters no longer needed to be delayed. His Majesty the King of Tiran has officially passed the throne to the Duke of Winter. Tiran will be renamed the Kingdom of Winter. David paused for 2 seconds, considering the right time, before continuing. Upon receiving this notice, all lords must arrive in Winter City before next autumn to pledge allegiance to the new king. Any lord who fails to arrive in Winter City in time will be considered a rebel. Finally, he emphasized to the ceremonial officer, Elias, that this notice must be delivered to all lords of the Kingdom of Tiran, including those who had recently been persuaded by the Temple or the Thordarinmer Empire to join the Holy Kingdom of Gaunt or become independent kingdoms. Elias didn't ask what would happen if these people ignored the notice. That wasn't his job. Besides, from the Duke's tone, he already knew his next move. The Duke clearly intended to use force to seize all territories. Not only the lords who had already rebelled, but also those who remained loyal to the Kingdom of Tiran but didn't necessarily care about the Duke of Winter would face a similar fate. Perhaps only those who promptly arrived at Winter City to pledge their loyalty would achieve a positive outcome. The question then became, how many lords would be willing to pledge allegiance to David Glamorgan, a remote border lord who had risen to prominence only a few years earlier and, through sheer luck, had secured the princess's favor? Although rumors abounded in Tiran regarding the Duke of Winter and the Winter Knights, most people were skeptical. If the Winter Knights were truly so powerful, why didn't the king send them south to confront the temple? Many parts of Tiran were in turmoil, with civil wars breaking out frequently among fellow Tiran lords, yet the Duke, who oversaw all affairs of the kingdom, had yet to intervene. Therefore, most people dismissed those rumors as mere rumors. Without family background, connections, or kinship, and even without significant prestige, David's fame rested entirely on a few announcements and rumors from the Kingdom of Tiran. Under these circumstances, the likelihood of the lords pledging allegiance to him was practically zero. No one present objected to David's order. Tony and Laura had long known this would happen, though it came a little earlier than expected. It wasn't anything special. Weatherby Swan, Elias, and Gareth had long awaited this day. As David's most trusted and important subordinates, their status would rise even higher with his ascension to king. As for whether the lack of an allegiance would embarrass the new king, no one considered it. They simply believed that those lords who didn't arrive in time would be in trouble. If they had come sooner, the newly crowned King David might have had a difficult time reclaiming their lands. After spending so much time together, everyone had a good understanding of the Duke's character. He wasn't the type of ruler to resort to treachery against his own people. Therefore, the Lord's absence from Winterfell was actually a significant help. In a year and a half, we'll build a military port on the eastern coast, connecting the eastern and western parts of the northern plains, while also opening a route southward. This was the focus of the next phase of the work. If completed successfully, Winterfell would march south to reclaim its old territory in the spring of the following year. The time frame was set for the year after next because the Knights of Tiran had only completed preliminary reorganization and weren't even fully equipped. This would have to wait until at least next year. By the end of their adaptive training, winter would be approaching, or even already here. Furthermore, various attritional costs had to be considered, and advanced preparations had to be made, all of which took time. Winning a war, even a crushing defeat, wasn't something that could be won by simply saying start fighting. David had temporarily disregarded the crucial issues of troop numbers and lack of management talent. His original plan was to capture each territory he conquered. Now that circumstances had changed, he had abandoned this expansion plan and shifted his focus to eliminating the primary enemy's active forces, pursuing both the Orcs and the Templars. As for the civilians, those of the Holy Kingdom of Gond, the primary focus was relocation, while the towns were abandoned outright. For David, the cities on the Bronian continent were outdated and unworthy of capture. Taking them would require time and resources to renovate and rebuild. Therefore, the only option was to simply take away the population useful to Winter City. This way, Winter City could continue to operate at its current pace, expanding its sphere of influence. Militarily, the focus would be on pursuing the enemy's forces. With Winter City's technological prowess, the Winter Army wouldn't have to worry about logistical problems. David wasn't sure if his idea would work, but his subordinates had plenty of time to develop and refine it. Perhaps a brilliant individual would emerge and solve the previously unsuccessful battle plan? As a general, one must be prepared for such situations. If things didn't work out, there were always Kryptonians, mutants, the former Sorcerer Supreme, and others to help. With so many hidden weapons, even if the plan faltered, it should still be possible to achieve its objectives. David could finally live out his days as the boss, doing the least work and taking the most credit. After giving his instructions, David inspected the various equipment of the Tiran Knights and finally visited the Cybertron Research Center. "How is the construction of your aerial surveillance and combat platform going?" He had come here primarily to find Megatron. He remembered Megatron's earlier decision to build an aerial system. If all went well, Megatron's external component would be of great help in the future. After careful calculations, we've determined that directly building a large aerospace carrier isn't realistic right now. As Shockwave explained, David realized it wasn't that they couldn't build such a powerful external component, but rather that Megatron's current spark wasn't strong enough to support him in mobilizing such a powerful body. While forcing it to be built was fine, Megatron would have to remain aboard the warship, practically unable to move anywhere else. It would be like Megatron himself staying in the air, responsible for aerial surveillance and high-altitude fire support. Is that so? It doesn't matter, actually. There's nothing important to do in Winterfell. I can stay on the helicarrier and practice the holy light, and try to make the spark strong enough as soon as possible. David thought about it and felt that what Megatron said made sense. As for replacing a transformer to do this job, not to mention that there are currently few Cybertronians who have mastered the holy light, are strong enough, and can continue to make the spark stronger. Megatron's loyalty to him is the important factor that makes David dare to let Megatron fly above his head on such a powerful weapon. David is even more confident in Megatron than Optimus Prime. Let's do it this way. How long will it take to build this helicarrier? Next spring. Chapter 381, Strengthening the Intelligence Department. The equipment for the Tiran Knights wouldn't arrive until next year. Megatron's external components wouldn't arrive until next year either. Add to that the development of the eastern coast, transportation links in several key areas, and the ongoing construction of new factories, and Winter City's schedule is already overflowing, with countless projects slowly progressing. If you were playing a game, David could just fast forward and skip the waiting time. Now, he could only patiently wait for the projects to progress, while also cultivating connections and strengthening relationships with key figures within the territory. For example, the Kryptonians, after arriving in Winter City a few months ago, their strength increased rapidly thanks to the sun's rays. David had initially worried that this rapid rise in strength would spark resentment among the Kryptonians, led by General Zod. Therefore, he hadn't rushed to assign them any tasks or positions over the past few months, focusing instead on observing their reactions. By this point, he was certain that General Zod's Kryptonians wouldn't cause any trouble. Although General Zod had noticed his own increased power, he still adhered to the previous agreement and was willing to continue to abide by it. It wasn't that General Zod was virtuous, rather, after careful observation and calculation, he realized that even with a significant increase in their strength, they still had little chance of successfully seizing Winter City from David. David and Superman were more than capable of suppressing Zod and Phyra, but even if the remaining Kryptonian warriors grew stronger, they couldn't guarantee they could suppress the other fighters in Winter City. Ultimately, the Kryptonians were too few. Furthermore, after David proved that Winter City truly connected multiple universes, General Zod acknowledged David's ability to find a suitable home for Krypton. As long as David kept his promise and secured a new planet to build a new Krypton, working for Winter City for decades wouldn't be a big deal. So, What reason did he have to oppose David? Zod was content to serve Winter City, and his men naturally had no objections. The Kryptonians began diligently learning all the knowledge within Winter City. They had already mastered the common language of Brunnian, but the Kryptonians' unique situation meant that these soldiers, accustomed to group living, lacked the common sense needed for independent living. Zod wanted to round up the Kryptonians and have them live in a separate area within Winter Camp, missions when needed, and on standby in the barracks when not. But David disagreed. He hoped the Kryptonian genes would remain in Winter City, but that goal wouldn't be achieved if these Kryptonians had no daily routine. He couldn't just pull Fyra out and have her have dozens of babies, could he? That's too evil. Even the savagely vilified Kryptonians in American movies wouldn't do that after capturing Kara. So, after David confirmed that the Kryptonians were well equipped to control their powers, he assigned them to ordinary housing. Surrounded by friendly and welcoming neighbors, they could experience a relatively normal life in Winter City. While they would gather regularly for training and carry out David's assigned missions, they had plenty of free time to pursue their own pursuits. Even though Kryptonians are trained as professionals from a young age, certain ideals are deeply ingrained in their genes. But humans, even Kryptonians, are prone to mischief once they start thinking. Especially since Kryptonian ideologies, etched into their genes, aren't so rigid as to be unchangeable. This provided David with a basis for change. If it were a particularly powerful, unchangeable ideological imprint, David would certainly not attempt to change the Kryptonian mindset. He would then seek to eliminate Zod. Even if he recruited Zod's remaining followers, they would be used as mere tools while he focused on training the next generation, a hybrid of Winter and Kryptonian. Now that he didn't have to resort to such extreme measures, he secretly breathed a sigh of relief. Whenever this happened, he would secretly mock himself, "I'm not the type to accomplish anything great," but David never considered changing his ways, and after dealing with the Kryptonian situation, he began to care for mutants again. Unlike the Kryptonians, the mutants quickly integrated into Winter City and loved it. Although the mutants lived relatively close together, unlike the Kryptonians, who were deliberately separated by David, David wasn't worried about them creating a separate mutant community within Winter City. Mutants were more open to socializing than Kryptonians, and as long as the people of Winter City didn't harbor hostility towards them, they were happy to make new friends. Because of Winter City's uniqueness, these mutants even took the initiative to get to know specific people. Take, for example, the two men who had recently been harassed for no apparent reason and had come to his place for some peace and quiet. "My purchasing agent business is almost dead." Ethan took a sip of tea. The rich aroma and bitter taste were a bit off, but after a moment's pause, he took a second sip. "Is this a new variety? It tastes different from what I've had from your place before." "It's a new variety developed by the Kingdom of Sparta. It's a stronger flavor." David liked the new variety very much. "How's your business going lately?" "My purchasing agent business is almost dead." As Winter City began to build various factories, many nobles also saw the business opportunities and opened factories of all sizes to meet the various needs of Winter City. For example, Ethan's previous work as an agent purchasing agent for things like paper, pens, ink, and lamps was no longer viable. Winter City now produced these humble daily necessities in-house. As for the rare items that Winter City hadn't yet begun to produce, they were basically sold out due to the low demand. Those who wanted them had already bought them from Ethan, and those who didn't want those things anymore would not ask Ethan to buy them for them. So, Ethan's purchasing agent business was essentially over. Fortunately, he had already completed his original plan, buying a house in Winterfell. He still lived primarily in his own world, so it didn't matter if his business failed. "If possible, I'd like to find something to do, otherwise I won't even have money to pay the utilities." Ethan was considering renting out his house or opening a shop. He didn't necessarily need to make a fortune, but ensuring sufficient liquidity in Winterfell was essential. It was a habit he'd developed over his years of professional experience, and he didn't see any harm in it. "You could consider working part-time as an instructor in Winterfell." "Instructor? Me? What can I teach?" Ethan thought David was joking. He looked at the instructors in Winterfell: high elf priests from the Order of the Holy Light, paladins from the Knights of the Silver Hand, mages from Dalaran, high elf ranger generals from Quel'Thalas. Compared to these monsters, he was just an ordinary person. Winter City also has an intelligence department, those intelligence officers who can use shadow powers to make themselves invisible. "I don't think I could teach them." "Of course I can, you just haven't learned the knowledge yet." In fact, I think if you were to learn, you'd learn faster than most people. Winter City's intelligence department has been constantly expanding, but the price of rapid expansion is the uneven quality of its intelligence officers. Edwin Van Cleef, the director, has no real solution. As Winter City expands, his responsibilities increase, and even his daughter Vanessa is so busy that he's rarely seen. Under these circumstances, there's simply no time to properly train these new recruits. Relying on veterans to mentor the newcomers? In fact, the original veterans were only half-baked themselves. In Van Cleef's eyes, they weren't even accomplished yet. Now they're being asked to mentor the newcomers, so imagine their level. Winter City's intelligence department has been able to keep things stable, largely due to its geographical location, but this situation is untenable. David was well aware of the situation. Even if Ethan hadn't come to him today, he would have gone to him. And yet, he had offered himself up. If you accept this position, from now on you will be Deputy Director of Winter's Intelligence Department, responsible for the training and competency review of intelligence personnel. In fact, David believed that Ethan was more suitable for the position of Director of Intelligence than Van Cleef. While Van Cleef possessed considerable personal abilities, his leadership and organizational skills were clearly lacking. Of course, Ethan wasn't considered an excellent Director of Intelligence either. After all, he was stubborn and a big gambler. But these were the only two options. Ethan had numerous ties back home, so being able to join Winter's war effort was already a good option. David actually preferred Soundwave to be Director of Intelligence, but that would take some time. I'm only responsible for training new people. Yes, that doesn't sound too troublesome. Ethan didn't think too long and quickly agreed. After all, such a risk-free job was very much in line with his needs. I accept it. Welcome aboard. David raised his teacup to salute Ethan, then turned to look at the man who had been sitting quietly in another seat. What about Clark? Not planning to hold a position in Winter City, Clark shook his head decisively. He didn't want to be an official in Winter City. In fact, he was very satisfied to be a leisurely farmer in Winter City. If it weren't for the fact that so many people had come to watch him recently, he would rather stay in his own farmland and work, although he could finish that little work in a short time. However, if you need any help, you know where to find me. Chapter 382 Famous People in the Multiverse. Clark enjoyed his ordinary life, continuing to be Superman in his own world. Though he'd inexplicably become the Avengers representative on Earth, he'd found this unusual identity had indeed reduced his troubles. Reporters who used to be nitpicky were now more polite in their comments, and politicians were even more forthcoming. For example, whenever he saved someone, there would always be people bringing up issues like nationality and financial losses. Now, these news stories had seemingly vanished. When they were occasionally brought up, they were met with merciless ridicule, as if to help him criticize the instigator. This situation allowed him to focus more on the very purpose of helping others. His smile grew more frequent, and he radiated like the sun. Of course, Clark constantly attracted onlookers, but it wasn't because he was handsome. It was only after many people learned of the Kryptonians' arrival in Winterfell that they realized Superman had also arrived. As the epitome of superheroes, Superman's name resonates throughout the multiverse. Even the mutant next door knows him. Many can even say they grew up watching Superman's works. Consequently, upon learning of Superman's arrival, visitors to Winterfell from the worlds of The Walking Dead, X-Men, and even Resident Evil practically treated Clark's newly opened Kent farm as a tourist attraction, lacking only a guide with a small flag and a megaphone. This situation left Clark feeling awkward, unsure how to dissuade them from leaving. Should he say, "You're mistaken? I'm not that supposed Superman"? Clark feared the other person would pull out a comic book, point at the person in it, and say something like, "Stop pretending. We all know your disguise." Finally, with no other options, he retreated to David's castle Glamorgan, where he ran into Ethan Hunt, who had also been the subject of frequent onlookers lately. David could only offer solace in their plight. "It'll be over in a while. It was just a momentary curiosity." And as Winter City developed and became increasingly familiar with strange and bizarre things, such a strong reaction would fade. Those who came later might be surprised, but seeing everyone around them acting normal, they wouldn't overreact. Most people didn't want to be seen as oddities by their fellow citizens. David, however, was more curious about Ethan's thoughts after realizing his true identity. Ethan seemed unconcerned. "Actually, I'd already noticed it. Ethan was a professional intelligence officer, after all. Even if his own world was relatively old, preventing him from gathering relevant clues in his own. With diligent effort, he could find ample information in Winter City. Especially since Ethan worked as a purchasing agent, coming into contact with nearly everyone in Winter City, and since they weren't wary of him. See, this is the key reason I asked you to be the intelligence officer's instructor. After chatting for a while, Ethan was the first to leave. Since he'd accepted the job, he had to do his best. Ethan wasn't the type to just take the money and get away with it. He also saw this as the greatest opportunity of his life, and he was curious about what kind of new life he would be blessed with. He knew for sure that his life wouldn't repeat its past trajectory. From the moment he set foot in Winterfell, his future had been altered. He was certain of that. Ethan's decision to accept David's recruitment might have been driven by a desire to disrupt his predetermined future. Clark, on the other hand, wasn't dwelling on it. He was enjoying the happiest, most carefree time of his life. His life was free of worries. He could fully utilize his powers as Superman to help those in need. He and Lois Lane had grown closer, and were just a stone's throw away from a relationship. Clark's only challenge was keeping the secret of Winterfell from Lois. After all, this secret affected not just him but a whole community, and he couldn't make a decision on his own. Lois's identity as a reporter was too sensitive. She had initially pursued him to uncover Superman's true identity. I tried asking David about this, and he replied, "If you believe her, then I believe her too. The Lois Lane of the cinematic universe is a more level-headed person, not one who's driven by the need to make a big story." Whether it's Clark or her boss, Morpheus, who speak to her, Lois immediately recognizes the seriousness of the situation and decisively abandons the story. With such a clear mind, David isn't worried she'll cause irreparable trouble. By the way, didn't that brilliant individual who always thinks humans are just as good as everyone else and always wants to prove something do anything against you? Are you referring to Lex Luthor? Or the other one? The other one's probably still formulating a plan. He won't act until you actually do something that threatens Earth. In the original story, Batman's constant targeting of Superman was due to Lex Luthor's covert instigation, mixed with personal animosity. Now that Superman and Zod haven't fought on Earth, and haven't caused such devastation in front of Batman, Batman's perception of Superman is relatively neutral. Especially since it involves David, the Avenger in charge of Earth, directly implicates a higher-level civilization in the universe. Batman won't act rashly, but will remain hidden. Lex Luthor, however, always troubles Superman, regardless of his version. Lex Luthor seems to be plotting something, but it shouldn't be a threat. Clark not only dismantled Zod and his companion's ship and transported it to Winterfell, but also flew his own ship to the far side of the moon. With Earth's technological level in that world, reaching the far side of the moon would be difficult. Without Kryptonian technology and kryptonite to target him, Lex Luthor's methods of posing a threat to him would be limited, if not non-existent. Provoking other superheroes to oppose him? That wouldn't be easy, especially since he's currently the protector of Earth. That's good, David reminded Clark to get some sun when he had time. After all, his world would soon face the threats of Steppenwolf and Darkseid, and a war was inevitable. Even if Superman survived, as long as the mother boxes remained on Earth, war was inevitable. Right, what? Any information about your cousin, Kara? Clark shook his head. After learning his identity and various settings, he'd searched for relevant information and even asked his father, now an AI, but the only answer he'd received was that he did have a cousin named Kara. But whether Kara was alive or dead, or where she was unclear. He even asked Zod about this, but Zod explained that he'd searched the universe for a while and the only Kryptonian he'd found was Clark. This meant that his universe's Kara had likely been reduced to dust along with Krypton. David sighed in regret. If Clark's universe also had Kara, his cousin would have been more likely to remain in Winterfell for a longer period than he himself. Now, if he wanted to recruit Supergirl, he'd have to travel to another parallel universe. Seeing that it was getting late, Clark took his leave. David sat in the garden for a while, watching the sun gradually set before rising and returning to Castle Glamorgan. Eating, chatting, attending to official business, practicing, and sparring with Sophia, Helen, Eva, Laura, Gwen, and the others became David's daily routine. He occasionally mentored Anton and Wanda, and when bored, he'd visit Kamar Taj to watch Steve teach Doctor Strange. As time passed, David awaited the conclusion of his ever-advancing plans. He also spoke with Abelson. King Tiran, who had unknowingly learned of his abdication date, showed no resentment at all. Instead, he anticipated the day even more than David did. His Majesty, the current King of Tiran, realized that many interesting events would unfold after that day, including the event he most longed to witness, Winterfell's counterattack against the temple, or rather, the Holy Kingdom of Gaunt. Even though it would take over a year, it didn't matter. He would surely see the temple's destruction within his lifetime. That was all that mattered. After finishing everything, David settled back into regular, stable routine, so stable that he barely noticed a passage of time. If Mark Watney hadn't suddenly appeared, he wouldn't have even realized how much time had passed. Ha, I'm back. Standing on the busy street, Mark Watney threw his hands out and laughed to the sky for 3 seconds before feeling a tinge of embarrassment as the countless people around him looked at him like a fool. He glanced around, confirming that he was next to the outer walls of Glamorgan Castle and, not far away, the familiar Cathedral of Light. He must have arrived in the right world. But why were there so many people on the street? Looking into the distance, countless houses had been built in the city, leaving almost no vacant residential plots. Looking east and south, the vast plains were almost invisible. He'd only been away for about a year, hadn't he? Winter City was developing so rapidly? If I had come back a few months later, would I not even be able to find the way to Castle Glamorgan? Chapter 383 The Most Familiar Strange City. David was delighted to see Mark Watney suddenly appear before him. After all, he was one of the earliest arrivals in Winterfell, and like Lorne and Fording, he had played a significant role in its development. Welcome back. David stood up, walked around the desk, and gave Mark Watney a hug. Instead of looking for a seat, David stood and chatted with Mark, asking about his experiences over the past year. You know, it's just flying back to Earth. Every day, besides exercising, there's a checkup. Before boarding the return ship, Mark had deliberately taken medication to make himself extremely thin, to match the severe malnutrition he would suffer on Mars, where he would only be able to survive on a ration diet of potatoes. So, once aboard, Mark Watney underwent a series of tests to ensure he had no underlying health issues. This was to avoid the tragic situation of expending so much effort and money to finally rescue an astronaut aboard the homeward ship, only to have him die suddenly mid-flight. After the tests confirmed there were no serious health issues, Mark Watney began his arduous recovery. He had to take regular food and nutritional supplements, and perform appropriate rehabilitation exercises under professional supervision. Don't think this was a pleasant experience, as Mark Watney had to maintain his long-term hunger, poor nutrition, severe weight loss, and muscle atrophy. He could only eat a small amount each day and exercise very sparingly to avoid injury. This distressed Mark, who, despite not actually having any serious problems, wished he could immediately use water magic to clear all his abnormalities and declare himself fully recovered. It sounds like you've had a very painful year. It was quite painful. After more than 10 months of space travel, they finally returned to Earth. Next came a series of examinations and follow-up observations to ensure that Mark Watney suffered no after effects. Even now, I still have to undergo regular, comprehensive physical examinations. Mark now looked much thinner than he had been in Winterfell. But back then, Mark Watney exercised daily, gained knowledge from the shamans, and earned the recognition of the elemental spirits. The elemental forces had strengthened his body to a certain degree, and coupled with the training he'd undergone to push his limits with David's holy light, Mark was actually quite sturdy back then. He looked about the same as when he first arrived in Winter City, a little thinner, and had essentially returned to his normal state. But it's finally a relief. According to the space agency's arrangements, the intervals between his medical checkups would gradually lengthen, and he would no longer be under daily official supervision, and could gradually return to normal life. However, as the only astronaut and botanist to have survived so long on Mars and successfully grown potatoes, he would have a lot of social engagements and networking to do. An ordinary person might even consider seizing this opportunity to make a killing, gaining fame and wealth, and then enjoying an early retirement. But Mark was no ordinary person. He wasn't concerned with the money and fame of his past world. He longed to return to Winter City, learn more about the mystical knowledge, and become an extraordinary being. After all this talk about myself, let's talk about Winter City. After finishing his story, Mark curiously inquired about the changes Winter City had undergone over the past year. I've seen a significant increase in residents, with houses popping up everywhere. A lot must have happened, right? Indeed, a lot has. David didn't stand there chatting with Mark. While explaining the situation, he led Mark to the tea room and briefly recounted the past year's events. Listening to David's account, Mark marveled at how much had happened in the year since he'd been away. "Why does it feel so much more exciting than when I was here?" Mark was speechless. It felt like he'd missed out on all the exciting things happening in Winter City since he'd left. It was a shame he couldn't witness Winter City's transformation into the Duchy of Winter. "Don't worry, the best part hasn't yet been missed." David had also made no secret of his impending succession to the throne of the Kingdom of Tiran, transforming Tiran into the Kingdom of Winter. The coronation ceremony was scheduled for next autumn, a crucial moment for David in all Winter City. "Oh, so you're not only the Duke of Winter now, but in a little over 6 months you'll be His Majesty the King of the Kingdom of Winter." David sipped his tea, not feeling any more superior than before. His tone and attitude remained the same as before when he spoke to Mark. This made Mark secretly relieved. It seemed the change in status hadn't drastically altered this friend's personality. He then inquired about who had come to Winterfell while he was away. When he mentioned Ethan Hunt, Mark felt his tea scald him. When he heard Sansa Stark, he froze for a few seconds, looking at David with a look of intrigue. As for Miss Hood, he was completely bewildered, completely unable to grasp the concept of a humanoid warship. He hadn't even realized that the Belfast, pouring tea beside him, was also a warship. When David mentioned Clark Kent and Clarice Ferguson, Mark's expression suddenly changed. "Wait, were you talking about Clark Kent?" "Yes, the Clark Kent I know. I don't know if he's the same Clark you remember, but if you're asking if it's Superman, I can answer with certainty. Yes. The Superman from Krypton." "What a generous gift." Mark, holding his cup, widened his eyes and exclaimed heartily, then realized something else. "What abilities did you gain from Superman?" "Biofield." Mark made a questioning face, as if to say, "That's all." Seeing David nod, he smiled and patted his shoulder. "Keep working hard. David's rewards would lead to upgrades, evolutions, or other abilities." Mark, having been around him for so long, already knew these things. Although he only gained the biofield, not all the Kryptonian powers, that didn't mean David would never gain them. What the future held would depend on David's next steps. After taking another swig of tea, Mark suddenly felt the urge to go out and take a look. Staying here and listening to David's stories wasn't enough to satisfy his curiosity. He wanted not only to see what was happening in Winterfell, but also to meet Clark. "I'm afraid Clark won't be seen often. Too many people have been flocking to see him lately. Plus, now that winter's here, he doesn't need to go out to the fields as often, so he'll mostly stay in his own world, just coming over every now and then." While the number of people flocking to see Superman has decreased, it still exists. Even locals from Brunel have started to come and watch. Because Superman is so handsome. It's said, just said, some people are starting to ask if Clark is married. If not, they'd be happy to introduce him to a good woman. Among them are some nobles from the Tiran capital. Go see the mutants, too. If Superman can't be seen, then the mutants can, right? Wolverine, Professor X, and Magneto are equally popular. They can't possibly go on missions together, can they? According to David, the mutant world is in a state of apocalypse. Currently, Clarice, nicknamed the Flash, has to frequently travel back and forth between the two worlds with her fellow mutants, constantly saving the ordinary people of that world and bringing them to Winter City. I'm not sure either. Mutants had indeed settled in Winter City, but with the constant travel between the two worlds, David couldn't be sure which mutant was home today and which wasn't. Actually, the mutants' relative freedom to move between the two worlds was thanks to Twinkle's supernatural powers. Unlike other people, when mutants came to Winter City, they didn't need to touch a specific person and be carried there. Instead, Twinkle opened a portal directly to Winter City, making it relatively easy for the mutants to quickly transport large numbers of ordinary people. Unfortunately, Twinkle's ability only affected their own world. David wondered if the teleportation ability he'd inherited from Twinkle would evolve into this form in the future. If so, it would be much easier to transport multiple people back and forth between the multiverses. A portal opened, and an army followed them to another world. What a stunning sight. Just as David was about to take Mark to the garage and then to the mutant neighborhood, he suddenly remembered something and turned to take Mark to the warehouse. "I almost forgot. What? This is for you." When they arrived at the warehouse, David took out a watch and handed it to Mark. "If you don't like the style of the watch, there are also rings and other designs for you to choose from." "What is this?" a new device that integrates communication equipment, microcomputers, storage devices and other functions. After seeing Mark put the watch on his wrist, David began to introduce to Mark in detail the function and usage of this multifunctional tool. By the way, fill out this form and give it to Eva. What is this? Mark was still marveling at the fact that Winter City had already created such a sci-fi product tool, when he turned his head and saw a form involving personal information. Personal identity information registration form, so that we can make an identity document for you. You are currently an illegal resident in Winter City. Chapter 384 Minister of Sanitation. Mark Watney, an undocumented immigrant, obediently filled out his personal information. According to David, he'd receive his own ID in a few days, and he'd need to carry it with him at all times. Winterfell's population was growing, and without proof of identity, he might face unexpected problems. Why not store your personal information in this tool? It's currently only being used on a small scale. It'll take more time for the entire Winterfell. After quickly completing their registration, the two handed the form to Eva before leaving, and then, in David's car, departed from Castle Glamorgan. I'd wanted to pick a golden apple for Mark, but Mark still had several medical exams to go through. He had to fool the people at the space agency before he could truly restore himself to normal. Let's go. Let's check on the mutants first. Mark wasn't having any luck. Neither Professor X, Magneto, nor Wolverine were home today. Professor X, due to his special abilities, had to accompany him on every rescue mission. Magneto and Wolverine, fearing something might happen to the old professor, also tagged along. This meant that the mutants almost always operated in groups, with only rotations of rest or stays in Winterfell to recuperate. The one remaining in Winterfell today was Roberto da Costa, codenamed Sunspot. His mutant powers allowed him to absorb solar energy and release it to attack his enemies, and he stayed in Winterfell to bask in the sun and replenish his depleted energy. Mark Watney wasn't particularly interested in Sunspot, a character who was a significant figure in the comics but a minor one in the film universe. While David and Robert da Costa chatted, he simply exchanged a few words of acquaintance, not discussing mutants or superpowers, before leaving with David. What a shame. I was hoping I'd meet Storm. That's your real reason, isn't it, huh? You're not interested in Storm. Mark sat in the passenger seat, his head swiveling as he surveyed the city, which had changed so drastically that it felt unfamiliar to him. Did you make a lot more close friends in the year I've been away? How could that be? It was just a bit of a philanderer, but Mark didn't find it strange. After all, David had the luxury of being a philanderer. They chatted intermittently in the car, driving along the main streets for a while before entering bustling neighborhoods. Watching the increasingly lively scene, Mark couldn't help but sigh. It's hard to imagine that just a few years ago, this place was a wasteland. Back then, even water had to be fetched from the river a long way away. It was only with the help of Laura, Fording, Steve, and others that the first running water system was built. That pipe had long been dug out and abandoned. Winter City's water supply system was now quite complete, but a new waterworks was being built along the riverbank to accommodate the city's ever-expanding size and ensure supply to Frostwatch and Snowfort. Huh? Mark exclaimed, as if he had seen something incredible. Am I seeing things? Are those orcs? David slowed down and glanced in that direction. He saw a brown orc standing there, but he didn't show any surprise. Yes, orcs. The orcs' presence in Winter City stemmed from the prisoners rescued from the Greenskins by the Winter Knights during the battle on the eastern coast. Maddox had led the Winter Knights to a brilliant victory, and the post-battle handling had been flawless. Properly cordoning off the battlefield, protecting the orcs' warships or their wreckage, preventing direct access to the orcs' weapons, and consolidating them under protective measures. His only concern was what to do with these orc prisoners. David's order was to release them immediately. Since these orcs were peaceful orcs, willing to live in peace, there was no need to unnecessarily incite killing and hatred, turning these orcs, who had left the hostile group, into enemies again. Understanding the Duke's intentions, Maddox released the orcs. Seeing that the metalmen didn't harass, torture, or even kill them, the brown and yellow-skinned orcs breathed a sigh of relief and gradually left the eastern coast. Up to that point, things seemed much the same as before. However, as the Winter City construction team arrived on the eastern coast and began building the port town, the orcs slowly began to reappear. Having been rescued by the metalmen in the past, the orcs realized that if they didn't bother them, they wouldn't kill them. So, They became more daring in their interactions with the metal men, trading their prey for food, farm tools, and so on. It wasn't until an orc, observing the metal men building the town, asked you if he could work in exchange for food that interactions between humans and orcs suddenly became frequent and intense. Because orcs are physically strong, powerful, and hard-working for low pay, just enough to eat, the officials in charge of the East Coast construction saw that a simple supply of food would significantly speed up the project, and there was no reason for them to refuse. Consequently, large numbers of orcs began to gather in the eastern seaport town, which, as yet unnamed, became a crucial link in the friendly relationship between humans and orcs. As construction continued, some orcs even arrived in Winterfell aboard Winterfell's transport planes, which is how Mark was able to meet orcs there. Weren't we at war with orcs before? Now the situation has changed. Our target is no longer these brown and yellow orcs, but the green-skinned orcs who wield fel energy. They are the real enemy. Orcs contaminated by fel energy are the enemy of all life on the continent of Brunia, a fact that is still unknown to all forces except the people of Winterfell. It seems I have a lot to learn. After listening to David's explanation, taking a bus to Winterfell, and strolling around, Mark realized he still had a lot to learn. He knew he would have to study hard for a while. Besides the changes in the city, one also needed to understand the changes in the forces surrounding Winter City, the upgrades to Winter City's various technologies, the changes in the racial composition within Winter City, and so on. Afterwards, Mark went to the Winter Barracks to see the latest light cavalry and heavy cavalry systems. He watched a trained Tilan knight skillfully navigate various obstacles on a high-tech motorcycle. The next second, the motorcycle transformed into an anti-gravity flying skateboard, and then turned into heavy armor to cover the knight's entire body. It was quite a shocking sight. Cool, Mark couldn't help but applauded. Make me a set too. These are prototypes and test samples, used for training and collecting various data. Basically, everything that needs to be collected has been collected, and the official model has been finalized. The formal production will begin next. Whoever likes it can take one home. But it hasn't been named yet. Do you have any suitable suggestions? Let me think about it. Mark thought seriously for a few seconds, and then solemnly gave his suggestion. The members of the Cybertronians who are responsible for military combat missions form the Decepticons, and this new equipment uses transformation technology, especially the super heavy cavalry you mentioned. The description is basically the same as Transformers. Why not call it Decepticon? David nodded while listening to the various analyses before, and when the name came out, he felt that his forehead must be full of black lines. Think of a name carefully. I'm not in a hurry. If it really was called this name, and Flash joined the Knights of Tiran, the picture would be so beautiful that David didn't dare to look at it at all. He felt that he would lose 800 million knights at any time. What's wrong with that name? Isn't the emblem of Winterfell a wolf, really? Think about it. Mark was confused and decided to go back to his own world and search for Tyrant Wolf. Full of questions, the two drove back to Castle Glamorgan. This time, Mark finally met Princess Sophia, whom he had heard of several times before and the only new friend David acknowledged. It's an honor to meet you, Your Highness. Hello, Mr. Watney. I often hear David mention you. He always says, I wish Mark would come back soon. No. Really, of course. David always talks about the lack of sanitation talent in Winterfell. What does sanitation mean? Ahem. Sophia, realizing she had said the wrong thing, stuck out her tongue, turned around and ran away, leaving David and Mark grinning awkwardly at each other. I'm a botanist. Doesn't that fit right in with your profession? I'm the Minister of Environmental Health. I'm a shaman, not a druid, more or less. The earth spirits of the northern plains would be happy to have someone who understands their needs and is responsible for managing the environment of this land. I also want to go out and see the world. You don't know how suffocating it was when I couldn't leave Winter's territory. Don't worry, this job doesn't stop you from wandering around. In fact, after taking this position, you'll be out regularly checking on the environmental conditions within the Winter Kingdom. Oh, that sounds good. Winter City will pay for a dedicated plane and all expenses. I'm glad to have this position. After a few joking exchanges, they shook hands. David no longer had to worry about the environmental issues in his territory. Mark was definitely more expert in environmental protection than he was. But it'll take me a while before I can take up the position. I know. Mark needed to free himself from all the worldly affairs before he could focus on life in Winter City. David knew this, so he wasn't in a rush for a month or two. Perhaps he could use that time to eliminate that hidden danger in the Marvel Universe? If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelists. There you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 385 Black Widow comes to surrender. David didn't rush into the Marvel Universe to begin his Infinity Stone collecting journey. Actually, he didn't need to rush. He'd originally wanted Tony to carve out enough free time to slowly tinker with the quantum space locating device, but Tony was always busy, starting new projects before fully completing one. Unsure how long Tony would have free time, David decided to cheat, have Steve use the time stone to take Tony to see what the quantum locating device was like, then replicate it. Then, they'd use the quantum space to travel to various parallel universes and collect the Infinity Stones. Entering the quantum space required cooperation with Ant-Man, which wasn't a bad idea for Ant-Man, as his wife was still trapped there, and he'd always wanted to rescue her. Tony couldn't be included in the negotiations with Ant-Man, who always believed the Starks were trying to steal his technology and had a strong prejudice against them. With Tony's temper, a simple exchange with Ant-Man would easily lead to a fight. So, this task had to be left to Steve. After all, he was still the commander of the Avengers, and this operation was strictly a just act to protect the world. Captain America's job was to negotiate between the parties. Thinking of this, David realized something. His original plan was to travel to the parallel universe and seize the Soul Stone from Thanos, leaving the other stones alone. But on closer inspection, it seemed the other stones could easily be obtained from other parallel universes, and there was no need to scour the universe for this world's Infinity Stones. He even instantly thought of which era would be the best to collect the Infinity Stones, with no consequences. The moment Thanos snapped his fingers and arrived at his retirement planet, he could simply launch a surprise attack and kill Thanos, securing all 6 stones at once. Would that be wonderful? Otherwise, he would have to go to Asgard to get the Tesseract, Xander to get the Tesseract, and the Collector in the Void to get the Ether. He had no connections with a Nova Corps on Xander, and that could lead to misunderstandings. The Collector in the Void wasn't a formidable opponent. Thanos' acquisition of the Ether from the Collector meant there might be some hidden agenda. Wouldn't he have disrupted the plans of some powerful being, and thus incurred their grudge? Thinking of this, it seemed even more impossible to just throw himself at someone's door. He decisively abandoned his original plan and adopted a new one, simple, direct, and efficient. David only needed to tell Steve about the plan, and then he'd just have to wait for Tony and Hank Pym to complete the preparations. To avoid forgetting, David immediately traveled to the Marvel Universe to find Steve and explain his new plan. After hearing David's plan, Steve was speechless. Was he using the time stone as a cheat? Would that shatter the entire timeline? However, Steve, believing his own timeline should have been shattered long ago, didn't object and simply agreed. After all, his role as Sorcerer Supreme was almost over, and once Strange had grown up, he could hand over the reins smoothly. If he's lucky, he won't even have to worry about Dormammu's invasion. Stephen Strange, the greatest and most brilliant Sorcerer Supreme, will naturally handle it. Speaking of which, I heard from Thor that last time you went to Clark's world, you claimed to be a member of the Multiverse Avengers? Are you planning to expand the Avengers to other worlds? That was in Clark's universe. Here, I'm the representative of the Multiverse Justice League to Earth in this universe. David gave Steve a speechless look. Others don't know, but you don't know what's going on? I'm just using a disguise to fool those politicians, but Steve's point in bringing up this topic wasn't to complain, it was that David's move had given him an idea. He was about to step down as Sorcerer Supreme, but he still shouldered the responsibilities of Avengers Commander and one of the leaders of Hydra. Avengers aside, with SHIELD still standing, the Avengers were living a relatively comfortable life. Tony, the most troublemaker, was constantly busy with David's various scientific projects, leaving him with little time for trouble. Therefore, the people of this world, Earth, admired and praised the Avengers, with little resentment. Furthermore, because SHIELD remained intact, the Avengers remained an official organization, free from politicians' anxieties. But Steve knew this situation couldn't last. Over time, many would inevitably rebel, each with their own agenda, but all posing a threat to the Avengers. What if the Avengers were given a more prestigious aura? Like David had done, He could choose a superior cosmic civilization and associate the Avengers with it, making it less likely for Earth's politicians to provoke him. For example, Asgard? Regardless of what Earth's officials thought, in the eyes of that advanced civilization, Earth was nothing more than a barbaric native under Asgard's protection. Steve even thought he could whitewash his Hydra followers, creating a rather interesting Justice League. That's a good idea, but how do you plan to make the appearance of Asgard and the Justice League a logical one? His trip to Clark's place allowed the Avengers to appear, precisely because they timed it to coincide with a Kryptonian invasion. Although General Zod's intervention prevented significant damage to Earth, the Kryptonians' power was clear to Earth's citizens. They were determined to take over, and given Earth's military's capabilities, they stood no chance. The Marvel Universe was more problematic. Since Tony hadn't messed with Ultron, and Hydra hadn't been exposed, the world had been relatively peaceful, with relatively few major events happening recently. Steve pondered the matter and finally decided to sacrifice his colleagues. Looks like another Hydra leader has to be sacrificed. David suddenly had the strange feeling that the Hydra captain before him was the true conspirator, about to overturn the world. Could this Steve he knew have been a Hydra himself? You can make your own decisions on these matters. After the details were laid out, David chatted with Tony for a moment, learning that Tony would be visiting Winterfell in a few days and was about to end his communication and return to Winterfell. Just as he stood up, Steve said he had something else to do, so David had to sit back down. Refilling his now empty teacup, David took a sip and then put on an "if you need anything, just talk" attitude. Clint's considering retirement, and, calculating the time, Hawkeye had indeed been preparing for retirement for the past few years, even completing all the necessary preparations. But what did this have to do with David? As a SHIELD agent, Hawkeye's perks were decent, and retirement matters should be arranged by Nick Fury, the director of SHIELD, right? Sure enough, the next sentence was the key. Natasha, seeing her good friend preparing to retire, also had the idea of retiring. Oh, David understood now. Natasha's situation was unique. Her desire to retire wasn't as simple as Clint Barton's. Natasha was young, in the prime of her career as an agent. Would Fury agree to her retirement now? Thinking deeper, with Natasha's background, even if Fury agreed, there would be plenty of people who wouldn't. So, Natasha had found Steve? Or had Black Widow already been eyeing Winterfell? And was she just using Steve to tell him about it? Natasha's early retirement is a huge loss for the Avengers, isn't it? Actually, the Avengers are now purely a combat team. Natasha's role here is more about logistics and liaisons, while her role at SHIELD is to maintain contact with the Avengers. So, she's not finding her job that interesting. I see. David took another sip of his tea, realizing that Natasha's desire to retire was fake. Leaving SHIELD was her true intention. After the Battle of New York, although she had spent considerable time with the Avengers, their closeness wasn't as strong as in the original story. In this world, Black Widow was only familiar with Hawkeye. Captain America spent a lot of time at Camartage, and in his free time, he'd visit Hydra to check on his men, only occasionally visiting Avengers Tower. Without the original Project Inside, her relationship with Black Widow was just that of an ordinary comrade. Tony Stark was constantly away on the outer planets, practically invisible. Even when he did see the secret agent and the great inventor, he had little to talk about. Thor, obsessed with Jane's gentle presence, spent his time on Earth with Jane Foster, only appearing on missions. That left Bruce Banner, Dr. Banner's second closest friend after Hawkeye. It was from him that Natasha learned that he had intended to move to Winterfell, but had been delayed by Tony's various research projects. It was then that Natasha began to think, a simple life in Winterfell might be a good option. This idea had grown as Clint prepared for retirement, and now it was being put into action. You know, I'm adjusting and strengthening the intelligence department, right? David pondered for a few seconds and decided to explain it to Steve to avoid any future misunderstandings. If Natasha, such an excellent intelligence officer, really goes to Winterfell, I'll most likely let her join the intelligence department, no matter what. It's her choice. Steve believed that as long as David didn't force Natasha to do anything she didn't want to do, Black Widow's future couldn't be worse than staying in this world. From what Steve knew about David, the Duke of Winter wasn't that kind of person. Set a time so I can talk to Natasha in person. Chapter 386 Packing the Avengers. Black Widow's desire to defect to Winter City was an unexpected bonus. While she intended to live an ordinary life in Winter City, could Natasha truly endure such a dull existence? She wasn't old enough to be exhausted. After a period of rest, even if David didn't seek her out, she would have come to David for more exciting missions. By then, Winter City's intelligence department would consist of Ethan Hunt, the Van Cleefs, the Black Widow Natasha Romanoff, and, with the addition of Little Brain and Confusion, would there be any defenses or intelligence these men couldn't infiltrate or steal? Thinking of this, David suddenly felt a pity. If only someone from Macros could come to Winter City. Although he and RC had used their memorized data parameters to set the flight vehicle mode to that of the VF fighter from Macros, it was ultimately a copycat imitation of the parameters, using similar technology, not the original. Furthermore, much of the technology in the Macros world was highly advanced. Obtaining the original technology would undoubtedly enrich Winter City's technological reserves. Of course, this assumes it's relatively late in the timeline. If it were Lin Mingmei or Chijo Teru, it wouldn't have much of an impact. Besides Macros, David was also a little envious of the technology in Space Knights. The ability to directly absorb antimatter, store it, and then release it at will would be powerful in any world. The construction of the eastern port city is progressing rapidly. The bulldozer, a member of the Digger Tigers, who's in charge of the project, has completed the new city's infrastructure. He's asking, "Sir, whether you want him to continue building the city or start constructing the highway to Snaufort. Build the highway first. Once the highway is completed, Winter City, the westernmost city on the northern plains, will be connected to the easternmost port city by land." Because of the leapfrog development, David hasn't considered building a railway system in the northern plains. Transportation will primarily be by car and plane. Have you decided on a name for this port city? What do you think? Aviva Port? Not very good. It doesn't sound good at all. Despite his words, a smile spread across his face. But Hiva wouldn't let her thoughts interfere with her work. Let's pick a different name. How about Port Sophia? What? Who called me? Sophia, emerging from the side lounge, rubbed her eyes and stretched. 10 minutes had passed before she finally understood what was going on. Are we going to name the new city? Sophia sat obediently, letting Belfast smooth over her messy hair as she pondered what she should name the new city. How about Port Tiran? David had thought of that name the moment he saw Sophia. While Port Sophia wouldn't be appropriate, Port Tiran was perfectly fine. For now, it was the first port city in the Tiran kingdom, so there was no problem with it. As for after autumn, there was no need to change it to Port Winter. It could just continue using it like the Tiran Knights did. Anything else? It's almost time for your appointment with Steve. Eva kept an eye on the time. David and Steve had a meeting with Natasha, the Black Widow, at Castle Glamorgan in Winter City. Seeing that time was almost up, David headed straight for the reception room. To his surprise, not only Natasha Romanoff was there, but also Hawkeye Clint Barton. "Clint, are you coming to Winterfell, too?" "I think that's a good idea," Clint said, greeting David. He'd come along out of concern for his old comrade. As for himself, he'd already made arrangements and wouldn't change them unless necessary, but he wasn't above buying a vacation home in Winterfell, so a relaxing getaway would be a good option. Winterfell's proximity to the forest made it a perfect spot for hunting, and there were a growing number of archery experts in Winterfell, offering Clint the chance to spar if he felt like it. While he didn't understand mystical powers like the Holy Light or the Arcane, he felt he couldn't fear any opponent when it came to archery. David and Natasha also exchanged greetings. Neither Natasha nor Clint knew David particularly well, so the initial conversation depended on Steve's constant conversationalizing. Fortunately, Natasha was an elite agent herself, so socializing was her forte, so there was no chance of a dull moment. After a warm-up, the group seemed to be getting along quite well. David then cut to the chase. "I heard Natasha's looking for a change of scenery. I do have that thought, but I haven't found a suitable option. What do you think of Winterfell?" David made it clear, not mentioning that Winterfell was welcoming her to settle down. Instead, he directly expressed his admiration for her professional abilities. Winterfell's intelligence department is still immature and needs experienced professionals to lead it. Just lead it. If you have any special ideas, I have no objection. In just a few words, David had made his demands clear. He wanted Natasha to join Winterfell's intelligence department in a senior management position, not just clerical work. He didn't mention compensation or benefits, Not because David was being a ruthless boss and was reluctant to offer any big promises, but because everyone present was considered one of us. Such matters were unnecessary, and David would definitely not treat them unfairly. Sounds good, Natasha thought, her decision coming to her mind instantly. Before I officially take over, I might need some time to sort out my personal affairs. Even after I officially take over, it won't prevent you from dealing with those matters. David had no objection to these recruits from other worlds frequently traveling back and forth to his own. As long as they completed the missions assigned to them, they could do whatever they wanted during the rest of the time. You don't even have to resign from SHIELD. If things went according to Steve's earlier plan, SHIELD wouldn't exist much longer. Once Hydra was exposed, SHIELD would undoubtedly be doomed. As for how Captain America, the Serpent's leader, would escape and clear his name, that depended on his own strategy. Simply leaving Earth? Whether it was another world in the Marvel Universe or Winterfell, either could provide Steve with a foothold. Did Steve send Natasha to Winterfell ahead of time because he saw that Natasha's future wouldn't be bright after his plan was completed? Come to think of it, a former Soviet agent who later joined SHIELD was exposed as Hydra. Even with the Avengers aura, Natasha would still be targeted. She wasn't like Tony Stark, a tycoon with access to technology and weapons, nor was she like Thor, a prince of an advanced civilization, nor did she have a vast influence hidden in the shadows like Steve. Natasha was just an ordinary female agent, and when that happened, she wouldn't have a peaceful life. He glanced at Steve. The current Sorcerer Supreme, who had learned this from no one, sat there smiling silently with a mystical expression on his face. In this respect, Steve was a competent Avengers leader, at least providing his comrades with a good escape route. Welcome to Winter City, not the Kingdom of Winter, not yet. Almost as David used the communicator to summon Eva, the door to the reception room opened. Eva walked in with something in her hand and placed it in front of Natasha. What is this? The basic process, a personal registration form, used to create an ID, a list of houses from which Natasha could choose her preferred residence. If she couldn't find one she liked, she could choose a location and submit her proposal, and the Winter City construction team would then build it, a ring-shaped multi-tool. Oh, this is very convenient. After learning about a multi-tool's specific function, Natasha began to complain to Tony Stark, "Why don't you make such a convenient tool for us Avengers? It involves some unique Winter City technology. This multi-tool with storage space certainly couldn't be given away casually, but a civilian version would be sold regularly in the Marvel Universe in the future. Without the unique Winter City technology, it wouldn't be a rare item in the Marvel Universe, and it would only generate some revenue on Earth." After watching Natasha master the multi-tool and complete the personal registration form, David signed and stamped the appointment letter. From this moment on, Natasha officially became an instructor in the Winter City Intelligence Department. Her main job now was to train new recruits alongside Ethan. Whether she would continue to focus on internal affairs or take on field work in the future depended on her personal preference. Seeing Natasha's future secure, Clint was delighted and immediately joked, "The pay is so good, I'm tempted. How about taking a part-time job? Is Winterfell in need of an archery instructor?" Yes, Winterfell in need of an archery instructor indeed. If Iwaka had the idea, David would have Eva present all the paperwork to Clint in a minute. I'll discuss it with my wife." He wasn't trying to please David, Clint was genuinely tempted. Being an instructor wasn't risky, and he could earn some extra money in Winterfell, and even bring his wife and children over for vacations. Considering Winterfell's many wonders, even if he couldn't learn, perhaps his children could. He didn't want his children to become superheroes, but rather to learn new skills while living on an increasingly strange and unfamiliar Earth. This would give them more options for dealing with future troubles and provide them with a safe haven if they were truly overwhelmed. Looking at Clint, who was obviously about to agree, David realized that he had packed up the Avengers without any special operations. Chapter 387, The Embarrassed Newcomer. Captain America Steve was one of the first to arrive in Winterfell, and he's long since established an inseparable bond with the city. Iron Man Tony Stark soon followed, becoming Winterfell's chief advisor. He now owns his own research lab and extensive production facilities. He's currently planning to build several factories in the industrial zone. Stark has become one of Winterfell's most important members, and he truly enjoys the place, even happier than on Earth. Although Bruce Banner doesn't have direct contact with David, he's indirectly tied to Winterfell. Tony Stark discusses many projects with Bruce Banner, and Bruce Banner, unknowingly, has been working for Winterfell. Of course, David and Tony aren't bullying anyone. Banner can always come to Winterfell to collect his deserved compensation. He recently had a cordial interaction with Thor, and David even healed Odin. This has instantly strengthened the relationship between Winterfell and Asgard, and the two sides are now close allies. Odin recently sent Thor to convey his gratitude and invited David to visit Asgard when he's free. Add to that a Black Widow, Natasha Romanoff, who has officially joined Winterfell's intelligence department, and Clint Barton, the incredibly excited Hawkeye who will likely soon serve as an archery instructor in Winterfell. He's already snared the entire original generation of Avengers. As for the second group, Scarlet Witch is studying the light at the Cathedral of Light, making astonishing progress. Wanda Maximoff is not only rapidly learning the light, but is also rapidly absorbing the arcane knowledge mastered by Jaina and Ronan. Jaina says this child is a natural-born mage, and that studying the light is a waste of talent. She should pursue more profound and arcane magic and become a great sorcerer. War Machine and Falcon, one Iron Man's best friend and the other Captain America's most loyal follower, make recruiting them easy for David. Aside from Vision, who didn't exist due to a dramatic plot twist, and Ant-Man, who hasn't yet joined the Avengers are almost becoming Winter City's team. I wonder what Nick Fury's expression would be when he knew this. The super team he painstakingly built was inexplicably snatched away by someone else. The King of Agents would surely deliver a passionate, motherly speech, warmly greeting David's ancestors. David and Steve took Natasha and Clint to see the newly chosen house, and would later show them around the city. It was natural for David to show them a little more respect since they came with such sincerity. Winter City has changed so much. The last time I was here, Winter City was barely in its infancy. While a few main roads had been built, buildings were sparsely populated, and wherever I stood in the city, I could see vast expanses of open space. Those with good eyesight could even see the vast expanses of farmland in the agricultural zone to the south from the north. But that wasn't the case anymore. The densely packed houses obscured the view, blocking your view in every direction. The streets were bustling with people, a stark contrast to the sparsely populated streets that gave the impression of a ghost town at night. I heard you've already started developing the entire northern plains. Steve was also curious about the surroundings. He now spent most of his time in the Marvel Universe and hadn't visited Winter City in ages. This was a good opportunity to observe the changes in Winter City. Yes, the infrastructure of the eastern port city has been completed and it's been named Port Tillin. It was the first port city in the Kingdom of Tiran, and the complete construction would take some time. Construction has also begun on the highway from Winter City to Snaufrest Castle and then to Port Tillin. It will be completed soon. Once this highway was completed, it would essentially cover the entire northern plains. The next step was to continuously develop the unused wasteland. Whether it would be cultivated into farmland or built into factories depended on the specific needs at the time. Your territory is growing larger and more prosperous. Steve observed the various pedestrians on the street. He couldn't see happiness on everyone's face, but he could tell from their complexions and clothing that they all lived well. He looked around and saw no ragged homeless people or beggars in Winter City. Natasha and Clint noticed this as well, and they began to wonder if the Duke of Winter had done something shady. Perhaps intelligence agents or secret agents had preemptively expelled the homeless? After all, it was the Lord himself who was leading the tour, so some superficial work wouldn't be surprising. Just as they were speculating, David, as if seeing through their thoughts, revealed the mystery. Winter City doesn't support idlers. This isn't the beacon of America, with its burdensome taxes and fees that can bankrupt the middle class. Winter City provides every convenience for ordinary people. There's no reason they can't even provide for their basic needs. Those who persist in being homeless despite all these offers are either pure laziness, or malicious criminals or spies. Regardless, David has no reason to tolerate them. Therefore, Winter City's reorganized patrol department has a special mission to apprehend these vagrants. That's right, not expulsion, but arrest. Apprehended homeless people receive Winter City's kind education, teaching lazy bones how to work hard and prosper, and criminals what it means to be a good person. If they don't want to be a good person, Winter City won't recommend further advancement courses, preventing them from becoming a good person. Thankfully, whether native to Brania or from other worlds, such people are extremely rare. After this order was implemented, only a few spies learned the final lesson. Ordinary lazybones were quickly brought to tears and vowed to change. After a period of forced labor, thugs and ruffians also pledged to behave themselves. These people are actually easy to deal with, especially in a world where the Lord's word is supreme law. So, Winter City has good security. For now, it's fine. There have been a few civil disputes, but no serious criminal cases. David couldn't guarantee it would remain this good. Security is easy to maintain now because most of Winter City's residents are new, and at this point, most people are focused on ensuring basic living standards. Winter City provides this, and most people's needs are met, so there haven't been any major conflicts. Once Winter City reaches a certain stage of development, with a growing population and more people's needs unmet, major conflicts will arise. However, reaching that stage will take a long time, so David doesn't need to worry about problems that might erupt decades later. Considering David's dream of expanding Winter City's development to other worlds and even space, perhaps Winter City can maintain rapid development for a long time. In that case, the major internal conflicts can be diverted. Who knows, David might tire of being king, and no major conflicts will erupt until the day he abdicates. After discussing Winter City's security and laws, the group arrived at the house Natasha had chosen. This was a detached house located north of Castle Glamorgan. Compared to the southern part of Winter City, the houses here were more relaxed, with wider spaces between them. Each house had a spacious front and backyard. Coupled with a nearby winter forest, the environment and air in this area were both pristine. However, houses like this were relatively expensive, making them less desirable for ordinary people. This house is really nice. If I were an instructor, I could get one like this. Clint looked around. The scenery was beautiful, the air was fresh, and while the winters were a bit cold, it was a different kind of charm. Snow shoveling was also a pleasant activity. He wondered if he should choose one near Natasha's new home. There are several new, unoccupied houses nearby. If you'd like, you can choose one now. Really? I'll be happy to help you. David offered him a gesture of invitation. After Natasha had seen her new home and decided how to furnish it, they began to return. She had plenty of time to explore Winter City at her leisure. There was no need to rush. Besides, Winter City was no longer a small town that could be explored in a short time. From now on, she would constantly travel back and forth between the two worlds, attending to personal matters in the Marvel world while also shopping for daily necessities. Then, when the time was right, she would completely abandon the past and begin her new life in Winter City. I'm really looking forward to it, Clint said, as excited as Natasha. However, he noticed a shadowy figure appear in front of him, which quickly transformed into a person, who collapsed to the ground with a clean motion. The person looked disheveled, shrouded in a worn white robe. Their exposed arms and back were so thin they barely had any flesh. Even without seeing their face, it was clear how poorly they were feeling. David and Steve froze for a second. They had both seen the person's appearance. It was clear this was a newcomer. However, it was rare to see a newcomer in such a state of distress. Chapter 388 Kara and Art. The only ones who could compare to this newcomer's misery were Hood, sunk by the Bismarck and then rammed by a ship driven by Norrington and his men. Even Eva and Clarice, who were being pursued, had only fallen and suffered no harm at all. Is she okay? The four people present, a supreme sorcerer and two elite agents, besides David, had excellent eyesight and discernment, and immediately identified the newcomer's gender. She's fine, and, I'd say, better than ever. After a few glances, David knew who he was. Winter City was especially sunny today, and the energy within the girl, lying on the ground basking in the sun, was increasing at an astonishing rate. With a holy light Steve casually released, the girl regained consciousness, her body recovering at a visible rate. Steve, your healing skills are getting stronger and stronger. That's not my credit. Steve simply released the most basic holy light to heal the other person, and the other person's body recovered faster than he had expected. From the way the other person's energy was constantly increasing from basking in the sun, Steve immediately guessed the correct answer, Kryptonian. Steve wasn't asking the girl across from him, but David beside him. His question alerted the girl, completely ignoring the comfortable feeling of soaking in warm water. She looked at the people across from her with a wary expression. Who are you? Then she noticed a change in her surroundings, looked around with a questioning look, and then carefully turned in a circle to observe her surroundings. Where is this? This is Winter City. David held up his hands to show his intentions. I'm David, this is Steve, Clint, and Natasha. He quickly explained the situation in simple, straightforward language, a task David had mastered. Then he saw the familiar reaction. The people listening to the introduction looked confused. Typically, the next reaction is disbelief and questioning. Most of the time, David wouldn't truly believe what he was saying until he'd tried it himself a few times, traversing the two worlds several times. Is this standard procedure in Winter City? Natasha and Clint watched the entire process. This was their first time seeing such a thing. After all, they hadn't lived in Winter City before, and hadn't had the opportunity to witness the sudden appearance of an alien. Their previous visits to Winter City were always led by Steve. Is it so? Steve recalled himself back then, when he hadn't believed David's words either, and only accepted the miraculous event after trying it himself. What a shame I wasn't there to witness it firsthand. The look of disbelief on your face must have been hilarious. As you live in Winter City longer, you'll see similar expressions often. Natasha believed Steve's words. She was sure she'd see similar scenes many times in the future. Her new boss, David, the Duke of Glamorgan, was still explaining the situation to the girl who looked like a Kryptonian when a shadowy figure suddenly appeared beside him. Oh? There's also this situation where multiple alien visitors appear simultaneously. Yes, I came to Winterfell with Sharon and Peggy. Steve was just trying to explain the situation, but it only led to another question. Peggy? Sharon? Natasha glanced at Steve beside her. Looks like I'm going to have a lot of fun in Winterfell. Steve hadn't shared much about his personal life with his fellow Avengers. But with Natasha's arrival in Winterfell, all his private matters would be known to them. So, whatever. He stared at the reappearing shadow, trying to figure out who it was. David, sharing Steve's thoughts, introduced a Kryptonian before him. You appeared just now, too. Watching the shadow gradually transform into a real person, the woman with shaggy short hair finally began to believe it. She had inexplicably arrived in another world, a place called Winterfell. And she could travel back and forth between here and her original world at will. Thinking of her own world, she had no desire to return. She carefully studied the handsome young man before her. A pleasant aura emanated from him, a strong desire to be closer. This feeling was baffling, as she had never met this person before. Kara Zor-El. Kara's name slipped out unconsciously, her brow furrowed as she took a few steps to the side, creating some distance between her and the newcomer. Her past experiences had filled her with a sense of wariness. She recalled the words Kryptonian she had just heard from the man not far away. If this was another world, how could that man know about Kryptonians? The slight surge of trust Kara had quickly receded. She stared around warily, suspecting that this was some new experiment. David observed Kara's wariness. Although he had guessed the man's identity, he didn't rush to establish a connection or bring up Kal-El. Only after Kara offered her own name did he say, "Welcome to Winterfell, Kara," before turning his attention to the other newcomer. After a while, the newcomer revealed his true form. David took in the man before him, with long blue hair and a delicate, princess-like face. He too was curiously surveying his surroundings. Unlike the others, this newcomer raised his head and gazed intently at the sky. "Hello, I'm David, and this is Winterfell." It was the usual introductions and procedures, and the newcomer, like Kara, was also incredulous, though his reaction was much more pronounced than Kara's. Upon hearing David mention the ability to switch between two worlds, he immediately turned and began testing. Kara watched the newcomer fade into shadow and vanish, observing the entire process closely, completely baffled by how it was accomplished. Just as she was about to take another closer look, a sudden cacophony of noises filled her ears, echoing in her mind. Her head felt as if it were about to explode under the barrage of noise. Then, a voice entered her ears, silencing all the other sounds, allowing her to hear them clearly. "Focus, ignore the noise, and focus on what you need to focus on." Kara, a gifted person, quickly mastered the technique. The noise that threatened to make her head explode gradually faded, though she still felt a slight discomfort in her eyes. After closing her eyes for a long moment, Kara finally regained her composure. She felt better than ever before, even her breathing became more effortless. She looked up at the sky, the sun here imbued her with immense strength. She gradually realized that more than that, she seemed to be drawing strength from the man named David. Is this an illusion? Just as she was thinking this, the blue-haired figure who had left earlier reappeared. The shock on their face hadn't faded, but rather intensified at the reality of it all. "Oh, this is truly fascinating," Natasha and Clint, who continued to watch the excitement, suddenly understood why Steve and Tony both loved Winter City. It wasn't just because of the magic, the elves, and so on, but also because the city was filled with the unknown. And for those of them who were a little special, it was the perfect place to call home. After David calmed Kara down, he looked at a blue-haired man who had reappeared. Confirming his experience was real, the man approached David. "Hello, I'm SYNOPSIS. Welcome to Winter City. Do I need to report or go through any paperwork?" SYNOPSIS' reaction suggested his situation was common here. This meant that this place called Winter City was home to many people like him, from other worlds. So, did he need to meet with the city's administrators? Or perhaps deal with customs officials? Although the city looked rather backward, he had no desire to challenge local order. "I need to fill out a form to get my ID. Who do I need to ask? Just follow me." David glanced back at the onlookers, then waved to Kara, who was standing nearby. "Come along." It was only then that SYNOPSIS noticed Kara standing nearby. She was wearing a ragged robe and barefoot, and considering the temperature, she looked quite distressed. His first thought was, a homeless person, then, realizing they were just like him, newly arrived outsiders, SYNOPSIS was met with a sharp glare after a brief glance. SYNOPSIS immediately averted his gaze, then looked around curiously. "This is Glamorgan Castle." David led the two into the living room and contacted Eva via the communicator, asking her to deliver 2 registration forms, a Brunnian common language learning device, and some clothes. "Please wait a moment," because David hadn't been discreet when using the communicator. SYNOPSIS and Kara both saw the holographic image in David's hand. They realized that this seemingly backward town wasn't as backward as they had assumed. David, observing the 2 newcomers, pondered another question: what a coincidence? Their ideas perfectly aligned with mine? Could this be a new feature of the upgrade? Chapter 389, Altar brings a galaxy. Eva quickly delivered what David had requested. He didn't rush the 2 to fill out forms, but instead instructed them on how to use the Brunnian common language learning device. Kara, a Kryptonian, had recently recovered from a short sunbathing session. The yellow sun had also stimulated her superpowers. Kara, also possessing a superhuman brain, quickly mastered the Brunnian common language. The learning speed of the device depends on the user's condition. Generally speaking, those with high IQ and mental strength can complete the process quickly, while ordinary people will need several days, and even longer for practical application. SYNOPSIS, for example, wouldn't be able to master a new language so quickly. He then realized that the disheveled woman sitting next to him possessed abilities far superior to those of ordinary people. From their previous conversation, he had also learned that this woman, Kara, wasn't from Earth, but a Kryptonian race. After quickly learning the common language of Brunnian, Kara continued to curiously examine the learning device before her. It suggested that Winter City had a high level of technology and was certainly not the group that had held her captive and subjected her to relentless experiments. Her wariness dissipated somewhat, and Kara directly asked David, "Why do you know about Kryptonians?" "Because there are Kryptonians living in Winter City." David knew it was time to summon Clark, but Clark wasn't in Winter City. He sent a message, unreceivable messages are stored on the server, and asked him to come after receiving it. "There are Kryptonians here." Kara was startled by David's response and stood up. If she hadn't reacted quickly and controlled herself, she would have punched a hole in the living room ceiling. How is that possible? Kara was skeptical, but then she realized that David had previously told her that Winter City was full of people from other worlds. Perhaps others had arrived before her? She hadn't yet considered the multiverse or parallel universes, assuming the Kryptonians in Winterfell were all her own kindred spirits, having simply arrived there earlier. David didn't rush to explain the situation, raising a hand to calm Kara down and continuing to explain the various details to the 2 before him. He also used this conversational format to get to know their situation. Kara's situation was easy to explain. Her home planet Krypton had exploded, and she, like her cousin Kal-El, had boarded an escape ship bound for Earth. However, upon arrival, she wasn't treated well. She was captured and subjected to various experiments, spending years in near torture. As a result, Kara harbored no affection for Earthlings and had no strong desire to return to her own world. If she went back now, she would return to the cage built specifically for her. Perhaps once she became stronger, she would consider returning, as there were things she needed to retrieve. As for whether or not to make those bastards pay, that depended on her decision at that time. Kara's description made everyone present feel a little awkward. With the exception of David, everyone present, including Natasha, Clint, Steve, and Eva, was from Earth. Even Seodo Malter was considered an Earthling, even though he was born on an immigrant ship and had never actually set foot on Earth. In any case, in the slightly awkward atmosphere, Kara finished her story. Perhaps to ease the awkwardness. Or perhaps because Eva felt Kara's current appearance wasn't quite right. After Kara finished, she called Belfast to help Kara find a suitable outfit. As Kara changed, the atmosphere became somewhat more normal, and Seodo Malter briefly introduced himself. His real name was Seodo Muri. Born into a kabuki family, he began performing on stage at a young age and achieved fame, reaching stardom at the age of 15 for his role as Princess Sakura. However, as he grew older, Seodo Muri grew increasingly reluctant to follow the predetermined path his family had assigned him. He yearned for the sky, freedom, and flight. So, someone from Seodom ran away from home and changed their name to Alt, from Erudo to Alto, determined to become an excellent fighter pilot. David recalled this. Seodom Alt, standing before him, simply explained his name, age, and a general description of the world he lived in. He was currently studying fighter piloting at the Meixing Academy within the 25th Immigrant Fleet, occasionally taking on jobs to support himself. He didn't mention anything about his family situation. However, this information was enough to pique the interest of the people present. Seodom Alt, a young student, wasn't a big deal. The key was the world he lived in. Immigrant Fleet? Humanity practically spread across the entire galaxy? Sounds impressive? Anyone with a passing knowledge of astronomy, upon hearing Seodom Alt's description, would understand the sheer magnitude of humanity's near-complete galaxy colonization. This suggests the technological sophistication of Seodom Alt's world is quite advanced. Putting aside other things, the technological complexity inherent in a colony fleet that allows humans to live normally in space, as if on a planet, is staggering. Gravity technology is merely the foundation of the foundation. Creating a near-perfect natural environment on a spaceship is more than just digging a hole and filling it with dirt. While Natasha and Clint aren't scientists, they understand the remarkable feat. I really want to see what it's like in person. It's not good at all. It can't even compare to a real planet. The skies aboard the colony fleet are simulated, and even at their most realistic, they can't compare to the real thing. Art had always longed to soar freely in the real sky. After arriving in Winter City and confirming his ability to travel to another world, he became so cooperative because he simply fell in love with the environment. Here, with a real sky, he could always come here whenever he wanted to soar. As for Natasha's curiosity about a colony fleet, he couldn't understand it at all. Having grown up in such a cramped environment, he didn't miss life there at all. After a few more words, Eva also completed Seodom Alt's personal information registration form. Kara, having changed her clothes, returned at this time. Neither of their forms were collected, but remained before them. David then gave them a detailed description of Winter City. Winter City is located on the northern plains of the Bronia continent. It is currently a principality subordinate to the Kingdom of Tiran, ruled by Duke David of Glamorgan. Seodom Alt and Kara were both startled. They remembered the young man before them introducing himself as David. Could it be a coincidence? Yes, this man before you is Duke David of Glamorgan, ruler of the Duchy of Winter, Eva said, confirming their suspicions. This Glamorgan castle you are currently in is the Duke's residence. Without waiting for any further questions, David continued his explanation of Winter City. He explained that while Winter City was currently peaceful internally, it was not without enemies. Winter City is home to diverse races from various worlds. Besides Kryptonians, there are Cybertronians, who are distinct from humans, High Elves from Azeroth, and the Orcs who recently began working for Winter City. Winter City is still in its developmental stages, so there are many lucrative jobs available. If you too wish to earn money that can be used in this world, you can choose any job you like. Of course, as visitors from another world, you have some privileges. For example, working directly for David Glamorgan, the Duke of Winter, not only earns a fixed salary but also receives numerous additional benefits. Specific details can be discussed separately. After a brief introduction, David spread his hands and asked the two newcomers if they had any thoughts on their future in Winter City. Well, can I take a look around? Of course, Art didn't want to make a hasty decision about who to work for. He was drawn to the planet's environment. If possible, he might not even live here, but only fly here when he felt like it. David didn't expect a young man he just met to immediately bow down to him. After all, he didn't have a tiger body and wasn't in vibration mode. Besides, it wasn't Alter Seodom that had been on David's mind, but rather the world he lived in. As long as Alter arrived in Winter City and established a connection between Winter City and his world, David's goal would have been achieved. He'd then find an opportunity to send the right people there to obtain the technical information he was interested in. David glanced at Natasha unconsciously. He had a ready-made spy. He wasn't in a rush. Natasha wouldn't be able to accomplish anything in the world right now. She needed training in Winter City to improve her abilities, and then upgrade to advanced equipment before she was fit to carry out missions there. Just as Alter was about to leave, and David was about to ask Kara about her plans, Clark texted back. "Are you in need of help, Clark? Come to the reception room at Castle Glamorgan. Your cousin is here." "My cousin?" Clark paused for a second before realizing who David was talking about. "Kara, of course. Do you have other cousins?" Before he could finish his sentence, a gust of wind blew by, and Clark was standing beside him. Chapter 390 Kara brings a tights. Kara, Kel, the two Kryptonians stared at each other. Everyone around them remained silent, watching the scene unfold. Art, who had been about to leave, returned to his seat, curiously examining the man who had suddenly appeared. How had he appeared? Was it some special device? Winter City seemed to have a lot of new and interesting things. I wonder if there were any airplanes? Art's mind wandered to random thoughts, his eyes darting around with curiosity. Clark ignored the glances of the others, simply gazing curiously at this cousin he had never met before. If this was truly his cousin, then she was his only living blood relative. As Kara and Clark checked in on each other, David emphasized his presence and reminded Clark, "This Kara is from a parallel universe to yours. So while she's related to you by blood, I'm not sure if she's your cousin." Perhaps it was because of the Flash, but someone in a parallel universe wasn't necessarily the same person as the original, unlike Steve's situation. In Steve and Peggy's parallel worlds, Steve remained Steve, his experiences different enough to make him either a Hydra Ravager or Captain America. Peggy remained the same Peggy, her experiences different enough to make her Captain Carter or Commissioner Carter. Clark faced a different situation. He faced Kara, whose experiences largely matched his own, but whether this Kara was the Kara of his own world was uncertain. At the very least, the Bruce Wayne Batman of Kara's world differed significantly from the Bruce Wayne of Clark's. After David's brief explanation, Kara finally realized that the Clark before her wasn't from the same world as herself. Their worlds were parallel, their connections strangely connected by the unique location of Winterfell. Clark could guess how David knew this, so she didn't question him. Amazing, Kara's guard had completely dropped. No matter how complex the situation, Cal's Kryptonian heritage couldn't be faked. Even if he was just a cousin from a parallel world, it was enough to bring joy to a woman who had lost everything. "It's incredible, I thought so too." Clark, having learned of Kara's plight, understood her reaction. He gently consoled her, jokingly saying, "But after living in Winterfell for a while, you'll realize there are so many amazing things happening here. This is nothing, I'm looking forward to it." In just a few words, Kara had made her decision. She would stay in Winterfell. Here she had her family, even if they were from another world, and she also had other compatriots, who knew who they might be. This place would definitely be more comfortable than living on Earth, which had left a bad impression on her. "If I could, I'd really like to get my things back right now and never go back." "What is that?" Clark assumed it was the spaceship Kara had taken, but Kara revealed it was just a piece of clothing. But after hearing it was the only thing Kara had from Krypton, Clark immediately understood why Kara valued the clothing so much. "I'll get it back for you, is that even possible?" Kara looked at Clark in surprise, then at David and the others. She had assumed she would have to become stronger to get her clothes back. Could he even bring someone to his own world? Could he have his cousin Carl come over to help? "Of course, you can. Do you want help?" David was stopped by Clark before he could finish. "It's just a simple matter. There's no need to trouble the Duke. I can go alone." He turned and winked at Kara before heading out of Glamorgan Castle with his cousin. As they exited the gates, David noticed Clark trying to remind his cousin of something, but due to the distance and the biofield, he didn't hear anything. David looked back at Art. Art had finished watching the excitement and was about to leave. He had originally wanted to explore Winter City, but he had overlooked the weather. Compared to the 25th Immigrant Fleet, Winter City was far too cold. He needed to go back and buy some warm clothes before even considering a visit. Besides, it would take him some time to learn the common language of Brunnian, so he wasn't in a rush to wander around. After agreeing to come back in a few days to pick up his ID, Seodomart said goodbye to David, left Castle Glamorgan, and trotted back to his own world. It's time for me to go back too, Clint, who had seen the excitement, prepared to leave after seeing the two newcomers leave. Although the Kryptonian named Kara would come back, he didn't plan to wait here. With this free time, he might as well go back and discuss with his wife about coming to Winterfell to be a part-time archery instructor. Natasha also wanted to go back, as she still had a lot of finishing work to do. By the way, this is for you. David took out 2 golden apples from his storage and handed them to Natasha and Clint respectively. Golden apple. Natasha initially thought it was a decorative souvenir, given to her as a new employee. But after receiving it, she realized it felt strange. It seemed to be a real apple. Is it edible? It's just a little perk. Then I'll be happy to help. Hearing it was an employee perk, Natasha happily took a bite before asking, what are its uses? Currently known benefits include improving your health, like making your skin more elastic, fairer, and more hydrated. Oh? This is truly a good thing. Natasha devoured the apple in a few crunches. For a woman, these effects were even more enticing than doubling her combat power. Clint, however, looked embarrassed. He didn't know whether he should accept it. Accepting it would mean he would have to report to Winterfell. David didn't offer any persuasion. Instead, Natasha picked up the golden apple and thrust it into Clint's hand. What's the fuss? You're definitely coming anyway. Clint, resigned to Natasha's words, smiled and said goodbye to David before leaving with a golden apple. You're not leaving. Natasha can now travel freely between the two worlds. She can just take Clint back with her. Steve wasn't ready to leave just yet. He felt there would be more excitement to see. Besides, he wanted to explore Winterfell and see this brand new Winterfell. He'd been busy in the Marvel Universe for so long, so a day or two of rest wouldn't hurt. How's Wanda doing in Winterfell? Very well. She's a quick learner. Besides holy light spells, she's also studying arcane knowledge with Jaina and Ronan. Wanda's rapid learning had David thinking. Arcane spells seem easy to learn. He was considering borrowing a few spellbooks from Jaina and trying to learn them. Perhaps he could even become a mage part-time? Or, could he borrow a few spellbooks from Kamartaj and modify some of the more interesting ones himself, creating a spellbook centered around the Holy Light? Call it the Book of Holy Light? Whether or not to charge for it is another matter. But claiming the copyright wouldn't be too much of a stretch, right? David suddenly thought this was a promising idea. It would be boring to spend every day in Castle Glamorgan waiting for the various development projects to progress. He couldn't just stay in his room all day, indulging in the pleasures of the world, could he? David didn't think it was a big deal, but he was worried that the others wouldn't be able to handle it. After a brief chat, Clark returned with Kara. The two hadn't been away for long, about the same amount of time as it takes to get breakfast. In that short time, Clark accomplished a lot. Not only did he take Kara back to that world to retrieve the Kryptonian suit, but he also completely destroyed the cell holding Kara, leading her out of the secret facility. Throughout this process, Clark didn't kill anyone. However, he did teach them a lesson. Anyone who attacked Clark and Kara or tried to stop them had their limbs broken by Clark. Having recovered her most important clothes and escaped the cage, Kara felt a surge of relief. Though she didn't understand why her cousin, aliased Clark, kept insisting, David's a good man, but be careful with him, she agreed. However, upon returning to Castle Glamorgan, Kara forgot about the incident and put on her newly retrieved Kryptonian bodysuit to go and thank David. Clark felt her warnings were in vain. Her cousin from this parallel world seemed unaware of the severity of the situation. Oh, here comes the fun. Steve, ever the fussy watcher, grabbed the snack platter from the table and smirked as he watched the excitement unfold. David, on the other hand, surveyed Kara's Kryptonian suit from top to bottom. The tight-fitting outfit perfectly showcased her model-like figure. Very nice, he observed briefly, congratulating Kara on having recovered her most important belongings and truly found freedom. Now, even if she returned to that world, she wouldn't be trapped in a cage. As for the crisis that would soon unfold on that world, David doubted that Kara had any intention of saving Earth. Would Zod destroy that world? Are you planning to live in Winterfell permanently? Yes, I'm not going back, Kara said, then suddenly remembered, I might go back from time to time to find out about Carl, but I'll stay here most of the time. Is there any work in Winterfell that would suit me? Chapter 391 Snowflakes Fluttering. There were plenty of jobs to choose from in Winter City, so Kara didn't have to rush into deciding. For now, she could stay at Clark's house, help out around the house, and get acquainted with Winter City. The day after Kara and Art arrived in Winter City finally received its first heavy snowfall of the year. I thought it wouldn't snow this year. David sat in his comfortable office chair, watching the snowflakes fall like goose feathers outside the window. He placed a book, those interesting little tricks he had borrowed from Gina, on the table and took a few sips of his hot tea. Does it always snow this heavily in Winter City? Wanda, clutching a few books and having just asked David for advice on holy light knowledge, peered curiously out the window. It was not like she had never seen snow before. Her hometown of Sokovia wasn't a warm place, and snow was everywhere in the winter. The sight of snow even reminded her of her hometown. However, the snow seemed a bit too heavy, and it showed no sign of stopping. The northern plains are practically a land of snow in winter. In fact, the snow started falling quite late this year. In previous years, snow would fall as soon as winter arrived, lingering throughout the winter before melting the following year. The melting of the snow marked the true arrival of the new year for Winterfell, and farmers there would begin preparing for the New Year's crops. However, as Winterfell develops, this situation may change. Some farmers appear to be considering using greenhouses for their crops. This would allow residents of Winterfell to enjoy fresh fruits and vegetables even in winter, making them no longer a privilege reserved for a select few. David took another sip of his tea and, as Wanda prepared to return to the Cathedral of Light, reminded her, remember to dress warmly. Winterfell's winters can be unforgiving, I understand, Wanda agreed with a smile. The feeling of being cared for was wonderful. In Winterfell, she had made new friends like Gina, Ronan, and Virisa, and she was increasingly reluctant to return to Earth. After David reminded Wanda and watched her leave the office, he placed his teacup on the table. With a gentle wave of his hand, a golden-rimmed portal appeared before him. As David stepped through it, the portal closed and vanished. David, passing through the portal, ascended into midair, hovering there, awaiting the approach of the figure below. David, it's me, Kara, soaring high into the sky, regarded David with a look of surprise. If she was not mistaken, he was using the same flight method as herself. Could this Duke of Glamorgan also have Kryptonian ancestry? But that wasn't the point. The real question was why this Lord Duke was here. Thinking of her cousin's repeated warnings, Kara regretted flying out in her battlesuit. She should have worn her down jacket. What are you doing? Did Clark explain the external situation in Winterfell to you? Yes. Did he remind you not to fly too high? Kara suddenly understood why David had suddenly appeared. Clark had indeed warned her not to fly too high, especially not to fly off this planet, because a powerful group of beings were watching the planet from outside. Flying out rashly would easily lead to attack. Kara wasn't sure what was going on, but she wasn't prepared to attempt it herself, so she didn't plan to fly too high, simply hoping to bask in the sun above the clouds. Unfortunately, a sudden, heavy snowfall forced her to soar into the air. I just want to fly above the clouds. That's good. Many in Winterfell were capable of independent flight, but most didn't need his specific instructions. Whether they were the Decepticons or the Kryptonians led by Zod, they were soldiers willing to follow orders and would execute them. Only Clark, Superman, and Tony Stark, Iron Man, were capable of independent flight out of the planet. Clark didn't need to worry. After witnessing the fate of the Pretender number 1, Tony wouldn't try again until he was sure. So David didn't need to worry about them. It was only because Kara's condition was uncertain that David stopped her and gave her a reminder. After finishing his business, David opened the portal again and returned to his office, not continuing his conversation with Kara. Watching David depart, Kara scratched her hair, thinking her cousin might have overestimated his own opinion. The Duke of Glamorgan didn't seem to care about her. Turning back, she continued her flight, until she felt the sun's rays upon her body after passing through the clouds. Kara paused, enjoying a leisurely, sunbathing moment in the air. Back in her office, David once again picked up the magic book and, following the instructions, began practicing minor, barely magical tricks like clean, dry, and mage's hand. For him, these little tricks held a greater allure than even the most devastating forbidden spells. He found these tricks incredibly easy to learn, easily mastered with practice. Even though holy light, As a magical power, lacked the flexibility and versatility of arcane energy, it didn't affect their effectiveness. Even if he encountered some obstacles, he could quickly find a solution. Didn't David know if he was truly exceptionally gifted? Or was it because he had reached a high enough level? He thought magic wasn't that difficult anyway. He'd probably borrow a slightly more challenging book from Gina next time. As David happily learned various small spells, an intermittent snow fell in Winter City, adding to the winter atmosphere. Kara and Art gradually became familiar with Winter City. Unlike Kara, who settled directly in Winter City and had a cousin to consult and answer questions, Art had to rely on himself to explore. After learning the common language of Brunyan, Art would visit from time to time, practicing his speaking skills by chatting with vendors. While his accent was a bit strange, it wasn't a big deal for the residents of Winter City, as there were so many people with strange accents in Winter City that everyone was used to them. Most civilians didn't dwell on the strangeness of their accents. After all, Winter City's residents came from all over the place, and some even had no idea where they came from. Therefore, no one was surprised by Art's accent, nor did they question his origins, which made Art breathe a sigh of relief. He was apprehensive about that situation, as it would leave him unsure how to respond. After receiving his ID, Art wandered around Winter City with greater ease. As he got to know the city, he forgot his initial thought, he only wanted to come when he could fly. He began to want to learn more about the city, especially after learning that Winter City had an air force and was constantly recruiting talented young men to become fighter pilots. Excited, Art rushed to the winter barracks for a tour, hoping to inspect Winter City's aircraft. He was deeply disappointed. Winter City's air force wasn't what he'd expected. There weren't many fighter jets. Almost all of the Winter Air Force's fighters were transformed from silicon-based lifeforms from Cybertron. Even most of its transport planes were transformed by Cybertronians known as Transformers. Winter City's air operations were largely handled by Cybertronians, and Winter City's recruitment of pilots was primarily for the few Quinjet, essentially a small transport plane, and helicopters. He sighed helplessly. His action, while seemingly insignificant, piqued the curiosity of someone nearby. "You look disappointed? May I ask why?" Alter turned to look. A tall woman happened to be standing nearby, smiling at him. "Hello, my name is RC, hello, I'm Sayodom Alter." Though she didn't know why she was speaking to her, she politely introduced herself. "I just didn't see the plane I wanted to see here." "Oh," RC glanced at Alter, who was a striking figure. His build and muscularity showed signs of training, but he was clearly still a teenager. "What kind of plane did you want to see?" "Fighter." Alter's eyes lit up as he spoke, revealing his intense yearning for fighter jets. It was a shame that Winter City didn't have any real fighter jets. The Quinjet wasn't even a fighter jet in his eyes. Actually, Winter City does have fighter jets. RC guessed what the young man was talking about when she heard him mention fighter jets. After accessing Alter's profile on the server, she understood his obsession with fighter jets. According to Winter City's registration information, the young man was a fighter pilot in training, considered a reserve fighter pilot. I'm not talking about the Cybertronian transformed fighter planes, but the fighter planes controlled by pilots. "I know what kind of fighter plane you mean." Art looked at the woman in surprise, curious about her identity and a little puzzled. "If there are fighter planes, why haven't I seen any trace of them? There's a severe shortage of fighter pilots here in Winter City, so the fighter planes that need pilots are parked in the warehouse." RC beckoned Art to follow her. Art wanted to ask who the other person was, but his anticipation for the fighter plane made him keep quiet and wait until he saw the plane. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelis. There you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 392, Mutants begin to integrate into Winter City. After following RC for a short while, Sayodom Marty was certain the woman before him must be a prominent figure in Winter City. The patrolling soldiers didn't bother to stop her. When they reached a massive hangar, a nearby soldier even offered to open the door for them. Holding back the questions he was about to ask, Sayodom Marty focused his attention on the gradually expanding hangar. As the door opened and the lights came on, several aircraft parked inside came into view. "What are these?" The planes before him varied in appearance. Some bore a resemblance to those he'd seen in his history of aviation, yet they were also significantly different. Furthermore, he glimpsed a few vintage aircraft in the back, identical to those he'd seen in books. This suggested they were from the Earth Age, making them antiques to him. He worried, wondering if all the aircraft here were just antiques. Fortunately, RC's introductions revealed that several of the aircraft before him were newly constructed prototypes from Winter City. They were tinkered with in their free time by the idle hands of the Winter Alchemy Workshop, primarily Tony Stark, Winter City's chief advisor, as part of a technical testing program. This not only validated the technology but also ensured that, if needed, a fighter design meeting current requirements could be immediately developed and put into production as quickly as possible. So, while Winter City currently lacked a true air force, its technological accumulation never ceased. These aircraft are capable of single-handed entry and exit of the atmosphere, equipped with the latest energy shielding and space compression technology. It could be said that these outermost aircraft already possessed combat capabilities comparable to those of the Decepticons, but whether they could fully demonstrate their capabilities depended on the skill of their pilots. After hearing some of the fighters' specifications, Art knew they possessed exceptional combat power. Judging by what RC had said, their capabilities rivaled those of the legendary VF-25. However, this presented a daunting challenge: he couldn't fly them. Their incredible maneuverability required their pilots to withstand terrifying G-forces. These aircraft lacked the VF-25's newly developed, miniaturized ISC system, inertial buffer, which stores inertial vectors in fold space, reducing the burden on the pilot. This meant the pilots had to withstand the terrifying G-forces of high maneuverability themselves, a feat virtually impossible. Art seriously suspected Winter City had misunderstood its pilots. Or was it that the humans of Winter City were exceptionally strong physically, requiring no ISC system at all? With this question in mind, Art observed the Winter City soldiers' training. Well, the answer was revealed. The humans of Winter City were indeed incredibly formidable. He hadn't dreamed of becoming a pilot in a place so full of monsters before. He was truly naive. Meanwhile, Art became even more curious about Winter City. He had seen many amazing abilities there, and when RC explained that he too could learn those abilities, and that mastering them would enhance his abilities, he suddenly understood the direction he should pursue. That young man named Art is visiting winter camp. Yes, David hadn't paid much attention to the young aspiring pilot, but RC had researched his profile and contacted him via comms, which informed him of Art's whereabouts. He seems to really enjoy flying fighter jets. Glancing at the bald old man he was chatting with, David wasn't surprised that he knew Art was in winter camp. As a mutant possessing the most powerful brain, Charles Xavier could pinpoint the location of every person in Winter City without even needing to search. Winter City was so small, Charles didn't even need to actively search. It was a completely passive skill. He would pay attention to Seodomart, a recent arrival in Winter City whose circumstances bore some resemblance to those of the mutants who had recently arrived. The old professor was curious about what kind of story this ordinary human boy could write in Winter City. Seodomart's experiences also provided a clearer understanding of the man before him, the Duke of Glamorgan, a powerful being far more profound than his youthful, harmless appearance. Charles Xavier, peering through his psychic powers, felt as if he were gazing directly into the light. Charles, with his extraordinary psychic powers, saw beyond the superficial perspectives of ordinary people. He could sense the turbulent currents hidden beneath that warm, divine glow. It was precisely because of this ability to perceive what others could not see that Charles feared for the future of mutants. He hoped to understand the Duke of Glamorgan better, to prevent him from leading mutants down a worse path. From what he had observed so far, the Duke seemed trustworthy. At the very least, his words were consistent with his actions, and he treated mutants with great care. Even though the mutants had been in Winter City for some time, they'd been preoccupied with their own affairs, offering little assistance for its development. While the mutants' presence had bolstered Winter City's population and continuously attracted human survivors from their own world, a truly ambitious individual wouldn't be satisfied with such a small benefit and would undoubtedly demand more. David, however, showed no such a tendency, especially not forcing the mutants to join the army or become a force to obey his orders. Even when a powerful Kryptonian like Kara recently arrived in Winter City, David, as the Lord, didn't demand her enlistment, instead allowing the powerful female Kryptonian to pursue her own path. This alone earned Charles's favor, and Charles, a man of considerable age and mutual respect, was willing to reward David, Duke of Glamorgan, for saving the survivors of their own world. The old professor understood that helping the Duke of Glamorgan was, in fact, helping them. After learning of the numerous enemies surrounding Winter City and the even more formidable ones lurking outside the planet, the old professor came to the rescue, expressing his desire to join the Winter Alchemy Workshop and contribute his accumulated knowledge. He also hinted that if there were any difficult combat missions, Logan, possessing immortality, would be of great assistance. Logan, is the rescue operation in your world over? Almost, Charles sighed. While his world's Earth wasn't completely devoid of humans, the remaining humans weren't exactly their own kind. He wondered if the Sentinel robots, having lost their target, would turn their attention to this group. Whenever he thought about this, he wondered if, per the original plan, wiping out this awful world line would be the better option. As if his thoughts had been read. The Duke of Glamorgan across from him had barely conceived the thought when he suddenly remarked, "There exists a world line where the Sentinels haven't succeeded." If anyone else had said that, I'd have taken it as consolation, but Charles believed the Lord of Winterfell, for Winterfell itself possessed real-life examples of parallel universes, as well as numerous people and events that challenged his very understanding. Perhaps you'll have the opportunity to meet your alternate self, or other acquaintances, in the future. I hope that day comes soon. Returning to business, David pondered for a moment, realizing there was indeed a mission suited to a warrior as experienced and fearless as Logan. The Knights of Winterfell are planning a search and reconnaissance mission in the waters east of Port Tiran, aiming for the orcs' original homeland. David felt the island might hold some clues. However, the risks were unknown, and no one knew what they would encounter. He had worried that Crossbones Rumlow and a few ordinary winter knights might never return. He considered sending Peggy, and even considered going himself. Of course, he would definitely bring along Clark, his top-notch bodyguard. If Logan were in charge of this investigation, the safety factor would be greatly improved, and he wouldn't have to make a special trip. He could just stay in Winter City and serve as his leader. After chatting with Charles for a while, the mutant leader left Castle Glamorgan accompanied by Storm. Mark ran in just as Charles left. "I think Storm has some feelings for me." While Charles and David were chatting, Storm stayed outside, apparently not bored while waiting. "Aren't you afraid Black Panther will cause you trouble?" This Storm doesn't know Black Panther. After a few small talk, Mark got down to business. With the surveillance removed from him, he had regained his freedom. From now on, he would maintain his identity as a scientist in his own world, occasionally publishing papers and giving speeches. The focus of life will gradually shift to Winter City, and his first job after taking over as Minister of Sanitation is to check whether the land in the northern plains is contaminated by fel energy. If so, it must be dealt with and resolved as soon as possible. What if not? If not, you just need to ensure that the development of Winter City does not seriously damage the natural environment. The construction and development of the city will inevitably have an impact on the natural world. The key is to grasp the scale. As a shaman who can communicate with the spirit of the earth, Mark should be able to determine the scale. In addition, can you see if you can train a few more shamans in Winter City? Chapter 393 Strengthening Potion. Winterfell now possesses the complete legacy of Azeroth's arcane spells, the skills and knowledge of rogues and assassins, and the alchemists, light priests, and paladins. Since Sylvanas joined Winterfell, she has gained a mentor truly versed in ranger lore, meaning that ranger, hunter, and other classes now have a complete system for development. In terms of class diversity, Winterfell is already quite good. But who would object to having too much supernatural power at their disposal? The shaman class, in particular, possesses far more significance than simply adding another supernatural class, thanks to its ability to communicate with the elementals. Unfortunately, there are only two shamans in Winterfell, one of whom is so absorbed in the role of supreme mage and the use of the holy light that he almost forgot he was a shaman. The other has been away for a long time and has only recently returned. So, are you putting me in charge of environmental management, or training more shamans? There's no conflict. When it's needed, I'll do it. Normally, I'll train the shamans. After all, protecting nature and ensuring the balance of the elements is your job, right? Mark found David's argument so sensible that he couldn't argue. Since that was the case, he didn't argue and obediently accepted his assignment. He didn't see any harm in it. It meant he wasn't just idling around in Winterfell, he was making a significant contribution. He could also feel more comfortable asking for favors from David. By the way, you said you were testing that ability. Did you get any results? No. With the arrival of Kara and Sayotomart, David suspected that his upgraded cheat code had gained the ability to lock onto specific targets. He was eager to test it to verify his hypothesis, but there was a problem that was troubling him. I'm a little unsure who to ask. Without a clear target in mind, even if a new person showed up, he couldn't be sure if they were influenced by him. Is it because there are so many targets that you don't know how to choose? Mark raised an eyebrow, saying, I understand. Who hasn't imagined interacting with the male and female characters in movies or games? While most people can only imagine them in their minds, David has the possibility of actually interacting with them, even communicating on a deeper level. It's only natural that he'd be conflicted. Mark would have hesitated for a long time, even making a list of his favorite characters, sorting out his priorities, and finally creating a list with a clear order of priority. That's what he was thinking, and that's what he suggested, wanting to help David create such a list right then and there. Think about priorities, like which worlds have irresistible beauties. David looked at Mark speechlessly. What did he think of him? He just had a few close female friends around him, wasn't that normal? Winterfell had Tony Stark and Sutton Stewart, so why would he be judged that way? Why did he receive such a judgment? It was inexplicable. Prioritize it based on what will benefit Winter City's development. He'd been pondering this question lately. What other worlds could potentially bolster Winter City's development and construction? Currently, Winter City had no shortage of resources for development and survival. Its population was steadily increasing, and the Winter Alchemy Workshop and Tony Stark had accumulated a sufficient supply of advanced technology. For a moment, he couldn't think of anything Winter City lacked, so his mind froze. Star Wars. Mark casually mentioned Star Wars, a brand with immense influence in North America. The technological civilization in Star Wars is incredibly advanced. After all, it's a civilization capable of roaming the universe in ships. That technology should be useful for Winter City, right? Besides technology, the Star Wars world also boasted the magical power of the Force. Could Winter City inherit another Jedi Knight legacy? The thought intrigued Mark. He felt it would be great to learn about the Force. A lightsaber was such a cool gadget, he wanted one too. That's a good choice indeed. Adding Star Wars to his list, David pondered who would be a good fit for Winter City. After much deliberation, David decided that Master Yoda, Qui-Gon Jinn, and Obi-Wan Kenobi were all good choices. As for Queen Amidala, he had no desire to go. In David's eyes, she wasn't as valuable as the Skywalkers. Any suggestions? Mark was delighted to hear David seriously considering Star Wars, but when he began to ponder other worlds, he suddenly fell into David's same dilemma of not knowing which to choose. After a while of scratching his head, suddenly excited, then feeling unsuitable and giving up, Mark finally understood why David couldn't choose the right world. When he was asked to choose, he really didn't know how to make a decision. The Lord of the Rings, what use would that world have for Winterfell? Thinking carefully, even if Gandalf or Legolas arrived in Winterfell, it wouldn't be of much benefit. At most, it would help Will Turner and Eric Lancher find their long-lost half-twin brothers. I've suddenly realized that the effect you gained from this power upgrade is a bit useless. Not really. If that's the case, it would be very useful if there were a world you were particularly eager to connect with. When there wasn't a world you particularly wanted to connect with, the random appearances were quite nice, offering a pleasant surprise from time to time. Perhaps you could ask someone else, like Laura. I'll do that. After discussing both business and personal matters, Mark excused himself and left. He had a lot of work to do, so he probably wouldn't be hanging around David much for a while. Although Mark had left, David had plenty to talk to. Charles had spoken, Mark had spoken, and David still had Zod to check on the Kryptonian general and ask about the Kryptonians. He then called in Edwin Van Cleef and, after confirming that the Kryptonians had gradually integrated into Winterfell, he left to find Tony Stark. Tony had returned to Winterfell a few days ago, and this time he would stay for a while. His main goal was to complete his own strengthening. Is this the thing? David stared at the tube of liquid emitting a faint blue light before him. It was hard to believe such a small potion could bring about such a drastic change. This is it, Tony said, pleased with his achievement. He eagerly explained the power of this potion to David. Don't underestimate this small potion. It's the product of Cordell's years of pharmaceutical expertise, sovereign genetic enhancement, Kryptonian gene editing, super soldier serum, gamma-ray experiments, and a whole host of other technologies. It even incorporates a portion of the golden apple. Golden apple? That thing can be used here. Don't underestimate the golden apple. Without it, I wouldn't be able to create this potion. Tony then pointed to the Heradric cube nearby. That thing helped a lot, too. The Heradric cube's compression and fusion capabilities were incredibly powerful. Without it, even if Tony had successfully created the finished product, it wouldn't be just a small tube of potion, but a massive enhancement device combined with a vast array of other potions. After hearing Tony's explanation, David finally realized how incredibly difficult this seemingly insignificant little tube of potion was to create. Does this mean that the era of universal enhancement in Winter City won't arrive so easily? It definitely won't. Prioritize enhancements for a few, then the military and students, and finally, all residents. This approach is perfectly natural. Prioritizing students for enhancements could even lead to a situation where ordinary citizens die before they even have the chance to enjoy the benefits. The enhanced young people would then grow up and fill the gap, thus achieving universal enhancement. Another option is to not enhance civilians at all, or to force civilians to join the military or obtain enhancement opportunities through other means. This way, the lower classes would constantly be transformed to maintain their vitality, creating an unbridgeable gap in power between the upper and lower classes. This would be a better option for David, as a ruler. Tony didn't mention it, believing David would have considered this, but the future King of Winter didn't seem prepared to use it. Anyway, now's the moment to witness a miracle. After Tony finished explaining everything he needed to, he took out a syringe, filled it with a potion, and injected it into his arm. Then, nothing happened. That's it, the strengthening has already begun. It won't be completed instantly, but will be completed slowly over the next year, just like the golden apples of Winterfell. Although the effects begin immediately after consumption, the changes are completed unconsciously. Compared to the golden apples, this strengthening potion will have a greater impact on the user and take longer to complete. The advantage is that it helps the user adapt to the increasing power, preventing them from losing control or causing damage to people or things around them. Of course, if you want it to be completed instantly, you can use a special instrument to accelerate it. Tony explained the instrument to David as he lay down in it. Please close the lid for me and start the machine. Chapter 394, Several people using strengthening potion. Finding the button to close the hatch, David pressed the option to begin accelerated enhancement. Watching the blue light emanate from the glass window of the hatch before him, David felt as if he were witnessing the birth of Captain America. But the person lying inside the hatch was Tony Stark, and Tony wasn't screaming heartbreakingly like Steve had. The ooze emanating from within the hatch indicated he wasn't in any pain at all, and seemed to be enjoying himself. The light only lasted briefly, disappearing completely after about 5 minutes. Meanwhile, a panel on the side of the hatch indicated the end of enhancement, and the hatch automatically opened. When Tony reappeared before David, his appearance hadn't changed much, after all, having been enhanced by the golden apple. However, his body had undergone a noticeable transformation, most notably in his height. Now, Tony seemed to be almost as tall as Steve. This feels, Tony smiled broadly, standing barefoot in front of David. Amazing. After letting Tony brag for a while, David asked him how he was feeling and if there were any side effects from this accelerated enhancement. The side effect is that it takes time for me to adjust to my current strength. This was also why Tony decided to stay in Winterfell for a while. He wasn't suited to conducting sophisticated experiments right now. It would be better to wait until he'd adjusted to his current body before continuing his research. What's the degree of enhancement? Will I gain any superpowers? This is a standard enhancement potion. What does that mean? It means it only enhances physical fitness. Of course, the actual effect was more complex. This enhancement was comprehensive. Not only did it improve physical fitness, strength and mental strength, and significantly increase lifespan, but it was also lifelong and could be perfectly passed down to future generations. This was the genetic enhancement technology commonly used by advanced civilizations in the universe, such as the Sovereign and the Kree Empire. After completing the enhancement, the quality of the people remained at a consistently high level. Powerful nations in the universe possess even more advanced enhancement technology, capable of granting specific individuals even higher levels of enhancement, or granting them special abilities. Tony possesses this level of enhancement technology, but it's not universally applicable. It requires fine-tuning based on the user's needs, essentially creating a customized, specialized enhancement. So, How effective is this universal enhancement potion you're using? He'd forgotten to ask earlier, but it wasn't too late to ask now. Tony's answer surprised David. After using this universal enhancement potion, his physical fitness would surpass that of Captain America after he'd used the super soldier potion. This refers to Captain America before he learned the light, shamanism, or camouflage. Since mastering the light, Stephen Winterfell's physical fitness has steadily improved, far surpassing his former self. It's safe to say that after using the enhancement potion, his physical fitness is now comparable to that of an Asgardian, marking him among the advanced civilizations of the Marvel Universe. So, if someone who has learned some mysterious power and is already strong uses this thing, what effect will it have? Or, if someone already has strong physiques, will it become even stronger? I don't know. You can try it on someone else. Steve didn't use it. The first person to use this potion was me. Tony was still adjusting to his new body and had to go through a series of exercises. Right now, he was even cautious with his water cup, so he didn't dare touch the row of enhancement potions next to him. You can take the enhancement potion back with you. Remember to transport this enhancement chamber to Castle Glamorgan. The enhancement chamber was powered by crystal ore, and each use consumed a basketball-sized amount of crystal ore. However, Winter City's crystal ore reserves were plentiful, so this loss was nothing. Upon hearing this, David immediately put the row of enhancement potions and the enhancement chamber on the table into his storage space. His storage space was now the size of a small warehouse, so carrying such a small amount of equipment was a small expense. But David still felt his storage space wasn't big enough. He would continue expanding it until he could fit his body, which could transform into a Mustang sports car and a Durandal fighter, inside. Then, he wouldn't have to transform into Cybertron every time he wanted to use a sports car or a plane. Leave one tube of the enhancement potion. I've only made this much so far. The next batch won't be ready for a while. Oh, David glanced at Pepper beside him. This tube was clearly for her. He took out a tube of enhancement potion and placed it on the table. David had 8 tubes left. He mentally calculated, Laura, Eva, Helen, Gwen, and Sophia, that's 5 of us. How should the remaining 3 tubes be divided? To Fording? To Mark? To Steve? Or to Gareth, Floyd, and Elias? Should Addis give one first? Or wait for the next batch? Or should Gwen, Sophia, and the others wait? Should he use one himself to see the effects? Suddenly, a headache hit me. Distributing benefits wasn't an easy task. How soon can the next batch be ready? And how many? It won't just be a few tubes, will it? How is that possible? While the production of the enhancement potion was complex, once the process was established, the subsequent output and speed of production were guaranteed. While it wouldn't be possible to strengthen Winterfell's entire population in a short period of time, and strengthening the army would also take some time, ensuring David's close associates were also strengthened wasn't a difficult task. So, even if those around David didn't get a share of the enhancement potion today, they would get their own soon. That's no problem then. Leaving Stark Manor, David returned to Castle Glamorgan just in time for dinner. Everyone was present today, including Gwen, and David mentioned the enhancement potion at the table. The enhancement potion? Give it to Sophia first. I don't think she'll need it in a hurry. After listening to David's explanation, Laura felt that since she was already a transcendent being, she probably didn't need it anymore. Sophia didn't hold back. She gleefully surveyed the potion in her hand, not even wanting to eat, eager to complete her enhancement immediately. She felt that if her physical fitness improved, she wouldn't have to suffer from the constant backache, leg cramps, and weak legs. If Laura knew of Sophia's thoughts, she'd simply chuckle and tell her to stop wishful thinking. If Sophia's physical fitness improved, her symptoms wouldn't disappear, they might even become more severe, with a chance of unlocking new abilities like Gwen's. Looking at the others at the table, Gwen and Helen looked quizzical as they received the potion. Eva even gave David a subtle look. Although she thought she was being discreet, how could she escape the observation of Laura, the Holy Light Hunter? Despite their quirky expressions, everyone quickly decided to use the enhancement potion. David was constantly improving, and at this rate, he'd soon be far more powerful than he was already. Even setting aside the minor life challenges posed by the physical disparity between them, she simply had to keep up with David's pace in terms of longevity, not just wanting to be with him forever, but also wanting to maintain a longer youthful appearance. None of those present wanted David to still be in his prime decades from now, while they themselves had already aged and faded. If that were to happen, even the most profound of relationships would be hard to maintain. Although everyone here had tasted the golden apple, an extra measure offered an extra layer of assurance, didn't it? After dinner, the women completed their enhancement potion injections one after another, each experiencing different reactions depending on their individual circumstances. For example, Sophia, as Tony had said, felt nothing. Without the aid of the enhancement chamber to accelerate her growth, her enhancement progressed slowly and imperceptibly. Eva, who had already mastered the holy light, was different. The potion seemed to react with the holy light within her body, and she could clearly feel her body rapidly strengthening under its influence. After the strengthening ended, the holy light she had consumed began to rapidly recover, even reaching a new level. After carefully observing Eva's condition, David realized that for someone like Eva, who possessed some mysterious power, using the enhancement potion was like having their own internal enhancement chamber, allowing them to draw on their inner strength to activate the potion's effects and achieve a rapid strengthening. Helen and Gwen's situations were different. Although they had been studying, they had never mastered any extraordinary powers. However, the injection of the strengthening potion seemed to unleash their potential, allowing them to instantly master extraordinary powers. Helen mastered the arcane, while Gwen mastered both light and shadow. Helen's mastery of the arcane wasn't surprising. She had long been wavering between the two, and this time, she had made a natural choice. She preferred the convenience of the arcane. Gwen's simultaneous mastery of these opposing powers was rather remarkable, and it gave David a rare moment of nervousness. In the real world, the opposition between light and shadow is clear, and shadow magic isn't simply a form of energy to be wielded by players as it is in games. It's no less dangerous than fell energy. Why was Gwen able to master this void-born power? Was it because she had learned to use Shadow's power for stealth? Or was it because of her long-term use of the Black Venom Queen suit, which imbued David with some infernal powers? Coupled with her long-term exposure to holy light, she has this unique talent of possessing the two opposing energies of holy light and shadow, which coexist within her body? Don't go back for the next period of time. Stay in Winter City for a while so that I can observe your situation closely. Yes. Chapter 395 The Orc's hometown is gone. Light and shadow are two opposing yet interdependent forces. While many understand that light and shadow are two sides of the same coin, and while the theory is readily understood, practical application presents far greater challenges. Due to the nature of shadow magic, wielding it alone presents numerous challenges. Countless examples exist of assassins who, believing they have subdued the power of shadow, have been carelessly retaliated against and lost their lives. Even assassins who utilize even the slightest bit of Shadow's qualities often suffer numerous accidents each year in SI7 alone, as they practice stealth, either violently killed or trapped between reality and the Shadow plane, unable to escape. Therefore, when Gwen unexpectedly grasped this power, David couldn't be more cautious. However, after 2 weeks of observation, David noticed that the light and shadow within Gwen had formed a harmonious coexistence, miraculously promoting each other's growth and transforming into each other without loss. David found this situation fascinating, and he couldn't help but investigate further. It turned out that Gwen was a bit dehydrated and had to recuperate for a few days before returning. After seeing Gwen off, David checked on the others. Laura had used the strengthening potion again. Her holy light was powerful, and her physical fitness had long since reached a high level. He had thought the potion would have little effect on her, but he discovered that her physical fitness had improved slightly, and her holy light had also increased. Through the verification of Laura, Eva, Helen, and Gwen, David gained a clearer understanding of the potion's effectiveness. Even those with already strong physical fitness and mastered extraordinary powers would still experience a certain degree of strengthening after using the potion. Furthermore, because the potion optimized the most basic aspects, Laura felt like a valve had been opened, and she noticed her strength increasing at an even faster rate. You can think of it as a significant increase in potential after strengthening. Those who possess certain extraordinary powers, like Eva, would experience a rapid strengthening process, and their mastery of energy would also increase. Those like Gwen and Helen, seemingly on the verge of achieving their goal, might, thanks to the stimulation of the enhancement potion, break through that threshold and master some mysterious power. Meanwhile, the newly infused energy will provide ample nutrients for the enhancement, allowing them to quickly complete it, similar to those who already possess certain powers, like Laura and Eva. Only those who are simply ordinary, or even stronger than ordinary, and still far from mastering some mysterious power, will require a longer and more gradual process, like Tony, or use a strengthening chamber to expedite the process. After understanding the specific effects and the differences between different users, David knew how to use the remaining potions. Let's give one to Addis first. The old hunter has been enjoying himself lately. Since the founding of Winter City, he no longer has to hunt for prey in the wilds, bow and arrow, regardless of the season, heat or cold. After becoming the head of Winter City's education department, he now only needed to stay in his office, review reports, and occasionally visit Winter Academy to ensure that all eligible young people in Winter City were enrolled in the school as ordered by the Lord, that the courses they were studying met the requirements, and that the students were developing as the Lord desired. This workload was practically nothing for Addis. He even felt it wasn't enough to fill his time. Food, clothing, and shelter were all secure. Suddenly, Addis found himself in a blissful retirement. What an unexpected experience, all this, simply because he had adopted a child without a second thought. Even more surprising was that he had not only eaten a strange golden apple, but was also learning the miraculous power of the holy light. He had never truly mastered it, but he hadn't consumed much of the holy light that David had infused into him, and he was still enjoying the benefits of this miraculous power. He had thought this was perfect, but then David unexpectedly gave him a potion. What is this? A strengthening potion, made by Tony Stark. In Addis's mind, anything bizarre and outlandish that he couldn't quite place was the work of that consultant named Tony Stark. Yes, how do you use this? Addis stared at the faintly glowing potion before him, asked a few simple questions, and then prepared to use it. He wasn't worried David would harm him, and he had nothing worth plotting against. David was already a duke, and soon to be king. Every time he thought about it, he felt a sense of wonder. The boy who had always defied everyone no longer had to consider anyone's opinion. Miracles truly existed in this world. After injecting the potion into his body, the holy light he had been using for so long began to rapidly deplete. Addis felt a miraculous changes in his body, and before he could react, he noticed that the holy light within him, which was about to be depleted, suddenly began to grow. At the same time, a certain realization struck him, and he knew he had finally truly mastered the holy light. Hey, a miracle happened to me too. The strengthening process was quickly over. Feeling a strength he had never felt before, Addis frowned slightly. It seemed he would need some time to adjust to his current state. However, compared to a strong and healthy body and true mastery of power, this little inconvenience was nothing. Are there any for Alfie? There are only 2 tubes left from the first batch, and Alfie's bloodline might not be suitable for this potion. Alfie was half-elf, so whether he could use this strengthening potion with his elven bloodline was still a question. However, he had considerable talent, and even without the strengthening potion, he should be able to become very powerful through his own efforts. David had originally planned to enlist Alfie in the Order of Winter when he grew up, but Alfie had recently been captured by Sylvanus and incarcerated with the Knights of Tiran. Considering that under the guidance of Sylvanus, the Elven Ranger Lord, Alfie might become a skilled ranger more quickly, David didn't object, simply reminding Alfie not to neglect his academic studies, then smilingly admiring Alfie's bitter face. After leaving Addis's office, David hesitated to give out the last 2 tubes of enhancement potion. He truly didn't know who to give them to. Besides Tony and Pepper, the only people currently receiving the potion were David's closest friends. No one would find it unreasonable for them to be the first to receive it. Even if David had no particular motive, there was no guarantee his subordinates wouldn't have their own. This was a difficult question to resolve. Rather than causing resentment among his subordinates, it would be better to hold on to the potion until a larger quantity was produced, then give one to each of his most important subordinates. The principle of unequal distribution, rather than insufficient supply, applies to every era and every world. David had no desire to deliberately create conflict among his subordinates. He wasn't at the point where he needed to play balancing acts to maintain his rule, and, as his power grew, it seemed he wouldn't need to resort to such tactics. David exhaled a puff of white mist as he emerged from the government building. Winter City, in the depths of winter, was a blanket of white. Even after the ground had been mowed, a large amount of snow had piled up around it. David even spotted 2 snowmen at the gate of Castle Glamorgan. After standing there for a moment, thinking, David decided to go for a stroll. It wasn't snowing today, nor was there much wind. While there was sunshine, it wasn't particularly warm. The dry, cold weather wasn't pleasant, so the streets were relatively deserted. Even farmers, who didn't have to work in the winter, mostly spent their time indoors in their homes or taverns. David's position prevented him from going out to join the people, but the lack of people on the streets made it easier for him to wander around, and his current fitness level wouldn't faze him. As he exited the main gate of Winterhold, he saw Crossbones Rumlow and Wolverine Logan arriving in a car. They immediately alighted upon seeing him. "Sir," Rumlow said. It was Wolverine Logan who nodded in greeting. "Are you back?" The two had been sent out to scout the eastern seas, searching for the orcs' home island of Asegus, gathering information about the orcs and the god known as Asegus. Nothing, they returned so quickly. Either they didn't find anything, or they did find something but the island was empty, so there was no need to search, they just returned straight away. "Well, we flew over the eastern seas for quite a while, practically circumnavigating the entire area. We didn't see any large islands, not even small reefs." Reporting was definitely something Rumlow was more suited to do. Logan would just follow along, providing supplementary information when necessary, or verifying Rumlow's report when David asked for confirmation. According to Rumlow's account, they initially followed the orcs' instructions, flying north along the coastline until they found the ice road that appeared in winter, then turned east and continued along the coastline. However, they soon realized they were flying further and further north, a direction that didn't match the orcs' information at all. So they immediately turned south and searched for the large island described by the orcs near the ice road. Ultimately, they found nothing, which made Rumlow seriously doubt the credibility of the orcs' information. According to the orcs' descriptions, their homeland has been plagued by natural disasters over the years. Perhaps the island has sunk to the bottom of the ocean, Logan speculated, which was the most reasonable explanation at the moment. If it truly had sunk to the bottom of the ocean, finding it would be much more difficult, and it might even be impossible to find it. Chapter 396, Marcus Morgan. David didn't dwell on the orcs' homeland. Perhaps he'd have the Transformers search again, but if they couldn't find it, they'd just let it go. As time passed, news of David's succession to the throne from Abelson spread throughout the Kingdom of Tiran. Even lords who hadn't received official notice had heard the news, not to mention the nearby Iron Tree Keep. Iron Tree Keep's lord, Marcus Dudley Morgan, was feeling a headache. The fire in the fireplace didn't warm the lord. His heart chilled upon hearing the news that Duke David of Glamorgan was about to ascend the throne. Adding to his distress, the only person he could discuss this matter with was his personal knight, Ismail Sosa. The nobles of Iron Tree Keep were unconcerned. As long as it didn't affect their status, position, or current comforts, they didn't care whether the king was Abelson Tilan or David Glamorgan, or whether the country was called the Kingdom of Tilan or the Kingdom of Winter. Under these circumstances, Lord Dudley Morgan had no way of discussing anything with him. Looking at Ismail Sosa, who stood respectfully across from him, Dudley Morgan beckoned his most trusted knight to a seat and had a servant pour him a cup of hot tea. A specialty of Winter City. It's a little strange at first, but you'll gradually appreciate its beauty. With Winter City's growing tea reserves, it was inevitable that it would become a trade commodity. Besides tea, a shipment of Garin rifles also flowed into Iron Tree Keep. Though this new weapon had only recently arrived, with the soldiers still undergoing training, it was already providing Iron Tree Keep with assistance on the battlefield. Lord Dudley Morgan and Ismail Sosa were able to comfortably warm themselves by the fire in their office instead of freezing on the fortress walls. This wasn't because the elves were unwilling to attack in the cold. In just 2 weeks, the musketeers had helped Iron Tree Keep repel 3 elven attacks, bringing some peace to these hostile neighbors. Marcus Morgan had originally thought he could enjoy a peaceful winter, giving the musketeers a relatively stable break for proper training. If all went well, perhaps he could teach those elves a lesson next year, preventing them from ever venturing into Iron Tree Keep's territory again. If possible, he'd have driven the elves deeper into the Ironwood Forest, allowing Iron Tree Keep exclusive access to its timber resources. But just when he thought everything was progressing smoothly, he suddenly received such absurd news. That David Glamorgan isn't content with the Duke's position and actually wants to inherit the throne. Ismail, what are your thoughts on this? Ismail Sosa took a sip of the hot tea. The taste was a little off-putting, but the lingering fragrance made him understand why this drink, called tea, was so beloved by the Lord. He took another sip, and the steaming hot tea washed away much of the coldness in his body, making Ismail feel much better. But he didn't know how to answer the Lord's question. Succession to the throne. How could a mere knight of the guards discuss such a major matter? But saying nothing seemed inappropriate. Ismail Sosa pondered for a moment before finally uttering, "This seems like a good thing, Your Excellency." Marcus Morgan seriously doubted his knights had understood his question. As the former lord of a crucial border town in the Kingdom of Tiran, Marcus Dudley Morgan was considered one of the most important lords in Tiran, holding a crucial position within the kingdom. But with the King of Tiran passing the throne to Duke David Glamorgan, would he still be held in the same esteem he had been during the Tiran era? Furthermore, sitting in Iron Tree Keep, smothering Winterfell's access to the south, he might become a thorn in the side of the King of Winterfell. More importantly, should he swear allegiance to the new king? This was his biggest dilemma. If he swore allegiance, he would remain Lord of Iron Tree Keep. He didn't believe a newly crowned king would immediately deprive a lord of his territory, even though he'd heard the Duke of Winter didn't divide up his territory. Furthermore, what would become of Iron Tree Keep after pledging allegiance to the new king? Marcus Morgan speculated that few lords in the entire Kingdom of Tiran would pledge allegiance to the new king, and some might even launch an attack on Winterfell under the pretext of rescuing the Tiran royal family. Regardless of how one looked at it, this succession seemed odd, and some lords believed that His Majesty Abelson was being held hostage by the Duke of Winterfell. Marcus Morgan, living close to Winterfell and having frequent interactions with him, knew otherwise, but he wasn't necessarily convinced. If he so desired, he could declare war on Winterfell under this pretext. The question was, could Iron Tree Keep defeat Winterfell? He didn't even need to ask his generals. Marcus Morgan could come up with a perfectly accurate answer: absolutely no way. Thanks to the information Moroni Mansfield had relayed repeatedly, and Winter City hadn't deliberately concealed its true strength, the people of Iron Tree Fort were considered the most knowledgeable group on the entire continent of Brunia about Winter City. In Moroni Mansfield's words, Winter City's true strength wasn't just terrifying, it was terrifying. If Winter City wanted to capture Iron Tree Fort, a single day would be sufficient, from the moment the attack began to the moment the battle concluded. And that day included hunting down the fleeing remnants of the army, nobles, and important officials. Simply overcoming Iron Tree Fort's defenses might take less than an hour. The Garand rifles Winter City had sold to Iron Tree Fort were obsolete weapons. Winter City's main weapon now was a newer firearm called the Piccolo Assault Rifle, whose bullets were said to be capable of easily reducing a fully armored knight to a bloody haze. Even if this fully armored knight donned enchanted armor crafted from a special metal, it would only take a few more shots. Furthermore, Winterfell was plagued by the gigantic, titanic Cybertronians. This mystical race, seemingly from nowhere, possessed formidable combat power, could transform into a variety of bizarre vehicles, and even launch attacks at high speeds through the air. How could they possibly defeat them? Could he expect his own archers to defeat Winterfell's aircraft? As a border lord, Marcus Morgan possessed considerable military experience. Even a brief consideration of these enemies confirmed his inability to defeat them. At this thought, Marcus Morgan suddenly realized he had no choice. Unlike other lords, he was completely unaware of Winterfell's strength. Precisely because of this understanding, he, in his right mind, knew that pledging loyalty to the great Lord David Glamorgan was the correct course. After days of debating, Marcus Morgan suddenly came to a conclusion. At the same time, he discovered that Ismail Sosa's words had a point. If he pledged allegiance to His Majesty Glamorgan, it would indeed be a good thing in some ways. Then, if he could command the southern arteries of Winterfell and defeat those rebels for His Majesty, would His Majesty reward him? Besides, if they helped him build a force comparable to the Spartan heavy infantry, wouldn't his position as Lord of Iron Tree Keep be further consolidated? If the elves dared to harass Iron Tree Keep again, they would be captured and brought to Winterfell, presented to His Majesty the Great David Glamorgan. Meanwhile, the Great David Glamorgan, unaware that he had conquered Iron Tree Keep, sat in the recreation room playing video games with Laura. They had chosen Resident Evil 6, but Laura had installed a mod that made the character she controlled herself. Both possessed incredibly quick reflexes and coordination, making any game a breeze for them. On screen, their characters were engaged in a devastating slaughter, their poor biochemical monsters offering little resistance. They could even chat while playing, their movements uninterrupted. When you inherit the throne, won't the entire northern Brunia continent become bustling? I think so. Many lords will surely declare independence, or perhaps they'll consider me a traitor who's held the Tiran royal family hostage and ally with others to launch a northern expedition. The next task was to eliminate these rebellious lords one by one and take over the entire Tiran kingdom. And then? Declare a war of revenge against the Holy Kingdom of Gond. That's likely to be the case. If given the choice, David would have preferred to eliminate the orcs first, but with the Sovereign Empire in the way, that would be a hurdle. It seems that once you ascend the throne, wars will continue to break out. You don't sound like a good king. With such frequent wars, aren't you worried that some people in Winter City will have bad thoughts about you? Having said so much, this sentence is actually the key. David certainly thought of this, but as Winter City's power grows, more and more people stand on David's warship. Some things are bound to happen, and they will not stop moving forward because of the ideas of some people. Moreover, David believes that those who really regard him as a friend, knowing some of the situations on the Bronia continent, will understand his choice. Even the most kind-hearted Superman Clark will not stand against David. Yes, if nothing unexpected happens, you will have become his brother-in-law by then. Chapter 397, Winter City's Military Strength. Snowflakes fluttered, the north wind howled. In the blink of an eye, another year had passed. But for the northern plains, the new year began with another cold blizzard. However, the people of Winter City were unaffected by the cold and snow. They stayed in heated homes, safe from the harsh elements and free from worry about falling asleep. Free from worry about their living conditions and well-fed, the citizens of Winter City even took to shoveling snow as a form of recreation, and laughter could be heard throughout Winter City from time to time. In such an atmosphere, one can only imagine the rapid development of Winter City. The industrial zone is growing and expanding, with several new factories built this month. Weatherby Swan regularly reported to David on the progress of various parts of Winter City, and today was the day for another routine report, the production of clocks, pens and ink, compasses and rulers, uniforms. Are you targeting Winter Academy? Yes, all the school supplies used by Winter Academy students are provided by the school. In the past, when the number of students was small, Ethan could have purchased these items back home, or even custom-made them by craftsmen in Winter City, which wasn't a big deal. However, since Winter City's population exploded, the number of new students enrolled that year was exceptionally high. Winter Academy not only hired many new teachers but also placed large orders for various school supplies, a move that presented business opportunities for wealthy nobles. Some nobles were certain that Winter Academy would remain open forever, meaning it wouldn't fail. With a growing population, new students would be enrolled annually. Furthermore, consumable items like ink and notebooks meant Winter Academy needed to maintain a long-term supply of these supplies. Therefore, the nobles sought to establish workshops to monopolize this stable business. With the establishment of the industrial zone, these workshops became factories. The industrial zone's continued expansion of factories provided more jobs for the city's residents. Due to the large number of vacancies, orcs began to work in the factories. With the completion of the East-West Highway, civilian transportation also began to flourish, transporting rice, noodles, vegetables, fruit, and clothing from Winter City to Snowford and Port Iran for sale. It also stimulated a boom in the civilian vehicle manufacturing industry. David's current challenge wasn't economic stagnation or a lack of resources, but rather a shortage of labor. Winter City's current population of 100,000 might seem substantial, a significant increase compared to its initial small population. However, when large-scale development began, it became clear that 100,000 people were nothing. This was with the help of Cybertronians and Winter City's extensive fleet of advanced machinery. If development relied solely on manpower, these 100,000 people wouldn't even be able to build Winter City. What about the military industry? Production lines for the new light cavalry armor, heavy cavalry, and super heavy cavalry systems have been established, and the first batch of equipment is expected to be ready before the weather warms up. The light cavalry armor, heavy cavalry system, and super heavy cavalry are about to enter mass production. The heavy cavalry system offers 3 configurations: motorcycle, flying skateboard, and heavy armor. The super heavy cavalry currently only produces 2 types, the armored off-road vehicle and a tank transforming large battle armor. Future production of other vehicles will depend on future demand. The Ghost drone also has a separate production line, but it's not currently being mass-produced. Only small quantities will be produced, and actual usage will determine whether it will be distributed en masse or used as specialized equipment. Warframe production is about to begin, and weapons must follow suit. The new flute multipurpose rifle has been finalized and, after testing, has proven to be a perfect match for the needs of the Knights of Tiran. This flute multi-purpose rifle features semi-automatic and fully automatic modes, enabling precise shooting at extremely long ranges. Besides firing live ammunition, it can also switch to energy projectile mode. In addition to the flute multi-purpose rifle, a new mechanical bow has also been finalized. This mechanical bow rivals the flute rifle in power and is even more suitable for rangers who have mastered arcane energy. This mechanical bow has a high affinity for energy and amplifies its power, effectively creating an enchanted item. However, its production cost is significantly higher than the flute rifle due to its complex production process and specialized materials, some of which require dungeon hunting. But David didn't care. Even though Alidon and he rarely went to the dungeon anymore, with so many people in Winter City, there would always be those who needed to go in and grind. For example, Gwen and the others still went in to train from time to time, and Mark had been going in frequently lately to improve his strength and collect materials. Even if the dungeon still had a limit on the number of people entering, as long as people kept going in, the amount of materials with hell power would only increase. Those materials would just take up space, so wouldn't it be better to use them to craft equipment and improve the strength of his men? That way, the Tiran Knights will be fully operational by summer. David had set the date for his succession to the throne in the fall, and the Tiran Knights reaching basic combat strength by summer was in line with his expectations. He listened to Weatherby's report for a while longer, and then to Elizabeth's. Elizabeth was now the head of the Winter City Police Department, responsible for internal security matters nationwide, and she had done a good job so far. Under her management, Winter City hadn't seen any particularly serious crimes, the worst being fights. There was no need to worry about public security. Finally, he asked about the military. After a period of reorganization, the Order of Winter still hasn't reached the 100-man mark. While the original standard would have allowed it to reach the 100-man mark, Gareth and Floyd have raised the requirements. Those who fail to master the light and become paladins will not be recruited into the Order. So far, less than a third of the Order has mastered the light and become paladins, but progress is strong. At this rate, full paladinization is not far off. Gareth also complained about Sylvanus poaching the Order's Soul Ranger, Jack Krauser. The Tiran Knights, reorganized by Sylvanus, currently number 450, and this number is unlikely to change in the near future. Whether the number will be reduced due to failure to meet Sylvanus's requirements or expanded to 500 due to outstanding performance will depend on the Tiran Knights' actual performance. The reorganized Winter Legion has reached 2,000 men. Why has it grown? We've recruited a new batch of soldiers from the civilian population of Winterfell. The Winter Legion will serve as the largest standing army, handling most of the regular duties, such as garrisoning, patrolling, and guard duty. Add to that the 800-man Spartan Heavy Infantry Regiment and the Cybertronians, who are almost entirely warriors, and this represents Winterfell's current standing military strength. With such a force, sweeping the continent of Brunia should be a piece of cake. Furthermore, David still has dozens of Kryptonians at his disposal. He hasn't yet decided whether to form a separate special forces unit for the Kryptonians or let General Zod command the Spartan Heavy Infantry Regiment. After the routine report, David was about to call Zod into his office to inquire about his opinion when Clarice and Kara suddenly appeared. What happened? Kara found some clues about the Orcs' homeland. Oh, David had originally sent Rumlow and Logan to the Eastern Seas to search for the Orcs' homeland, Essegus Island, but they found nothing. Later, he had intended to have the Cybertronians investigate the sea, but Kara and Clarice, who had recently been free, took over the task and flew to the Eastern Seas in a Quinjet. After Kara found some clues, they used their shimmering teleportation ability to return to Winterfell and then rush to report to David. Are there technological artifacts disguised as reefs on the seafloor? Yes, Kara said she had found more than one, and had seen several similar technological artifacts in a certain area. From her observations, it seemed like a connection to a larger facility. Oh, David immediately thought of a possibility. Was the so-called Essegus Island actually a large ship disguised as an island? Or something similar? It wasn't hard to guess, especially considering that the Orcs were a race deliberately cast by the gods, and given the numerous previous examples of humans and dark elves. Are there any other facilities below the interface? No, David nodded in understanding. He now began to ponder another question. If this island truly was some kind of large facility, where would it go after completing its mission to deploy the new species? Would it leave the planet? Or would it dock somewhere else? Leaving the planet was a no-brainer. But if it didn't leave, but instead dock somewhere else. Considering the water depth, didn't that mean there was another continent to the east, or even further away? David wasn't sure if his guess was right. If he was right, that continent must have a closer connection with the gods in the sky. Thank you for your hard work. You're welcome. It's just a small favor. Kara considered her contribution insignificant. After living in Winter City for a while, she had grown to love the place. She wanted Winter City's beauty to last forever, and she was happy to contribute to that end. Anything else that needs to be addressed? Not at the moment. David wanted to ask Kara about her recent life and whether she had found a satisfactory job. But Liadrin was waiting outside. So David had turned the conversation and let Liadrin in to report on the situation of the elves in the Iron Forest. Chapter 398 Batman's Invitation. A few months ago, David had sent Liadrin and Sylvanus to meet the elves in the Ironwood Forest. They discovered that these elves were a peaceful group, completely averse to conflict. They had settled there, disliking both human and kin, and had migrated to this elven-free region. Finding the elves seemingly harmless, Sylvanus returned to Winterfell to continue training the Knights of Tiran. Liadrin planned to stay in the elven village for a while longer, observing them to determine if they were truly harmless. By then, she had a clear conclusion: these elves were truly pacifists, belonging to a marginalized group within the Ironwood Forest. Several of them were from the very group currently at war with Ironwood Keep. Through this group, Liadrin also learned of the existence of several elven tribes within the Ironwood Forest, and the one at war with Ironwood Keep was the most powerful in the region. It's said that before the war with Irontree Keep, this tribe, inspired by an oracle, began gathering nearby elven tribes, causing some unwilling elves to flee. The rapid growth of this small village is also related to the changes within the elven tribes. Furthermore, there's another elven tribe west of the Irontree Forest. While its numbers aren't large, it includes some dark elves from the Lost Lands. Generally speaking, this is the situation within the Irontree Forest. The elves Liadrin encountered should be able to be peacefully absorbed into Winterfell. The stance of the western tribe is unclear, and the large number of elves east of the forest will likely need to be subdued first. With David already making preliminary preparations for sweeping across the Bronia continent, he can't afford to maintain a force so close to his home city, one that's completely independent of Winterfell. Therefore, these elves will either join Winterfell or be eliminated. Previously, the poor relationship between humans and elves in Irontree Keep made it nearly impossible to absorb the elves of the Irontree Forest into Winterfell. Now, a promising opportunity exists. David was unaware that Marcus Morgan of Irontree Keep had pledged his allegiance. This news would have made him even happier. This meant he had directly seized Irontree Keep and a large area of Irontree Forest, completely consolidating his control over the area surrounding Winter City. With no further worries, he could consider moving his forces south. Of course, the reality was far from simple. As the cold winds from the north weakened and a hint of warmth began to appear on the northern plains, the elves who had been battling Irontree Keep suddenly moved north, shifting the focus of their attack from Irontree Keep to the northern plains. David had no idea why these elves had suddenly come to attack Winter City. Did they believe Winter City was easier to bully than Irontree Keep? Or did they believe the northern plains offered more territory and wanted to seize a portion as a forward base? Whatever the elves' reasoning, this attack was nothing short of a suicide mission. Even with their newfound abilities, swords and arrows imbued with powerful energy, and the participation of even more massive forest guardians, giant tree men, whose names Liadrin had learned about, the battle remained one-sided. The Spartan heavy infantry, currently responsible for patrolling and garrisoning, were experienced and equipped with overwhelming force, slaughtering the enemy in a bloodbath. Had they not received orders to charge into the Ironwood Forest and launch a counterattack, the elven tribe in the central and eastern Ironwood Forest might have been completely annihilated today. However, for these elves, having provoked Winter City, their annihilation was imminent. David, not wanting to miss such an opportunity, immediately ordered Gareth Stanton to mobilize the Winter Legion and the Knights of Tiran to launch a counterattack against the Ironwood Forest elves. Real war will allow for faster reorganization, training and reorganizing through battle. David used the elves as training targets. Sylvanus was delighted, too. She felt this kind of training was far more effective than tormenting these fools on the training grounds. A ranger, after all, couldn't become a true ranger without entering the forest. She felt her men, after all human knights, lacked the experience of real forest combat. This kind of true forest warfare was far more effective than training in the peace and quiet of the forest. The beasts of the winter forest breathed a sigh of relief, just as the first batch of trainees from the Tiran Knights and the Winter Legion officially set out south to launch a counterattack against the elves. The first warm winds of the year finally blew across the northern lands, melting the snow that had clung to the winter. It's getting warmer. David wasn't in Glamorgan Castle at the moment, not even in Winter City. He hovered high in the air, feeling the comforting warmth of the sun on his body. The holy light within him seemed to respond, radiating a faint glow through David's body. Nearby, Kara, also basking in the sun, felt as if she were basking in two suns simultaneously. Kara, accustomed to this state, reveled in it. She felt it was a double pleasure, her strength rapidly increasing in this state. Although she still couldn't figure out David's true identity, Kara didn't dwell on it. Knowing he was a good person was enough. As for Clark's warning, Kara had grown accustomed to her cousin's name. She gradually stopped taking it seriously after realizing David hadn't crossed any lines or behaved in a disrespectful manner. As the two of them were sunbathing together, a third person suddenly flew over. Judging by their appearance, they weren't here to join them in their high-altitude sunbathing. Kara saw Clark, dressed in his casual attire, flying over, thinking he was looking for her. It turned out he was looking for David. What happened? Clark's proactive approach was likely related to her casually mentioned multiverse Avengers. Someone wants to see you. Who? David's mind raced, thinking of every name he could name in the DCEU. Finally, one person came to mind. Could it be Bruce Wayne? It's him. That's not a surprising answer. David didn't find it strange. Given Bruce Wayne's personality, it would be strange if he didn't want to see him. Batman's personality and methods would have been a covert investigation, but Bruce Wayne would have been embarrassed to find that, apart from contacting Superman, he couldn't find any leads on David. So, he had to use Superman to pass on the message. I'd really like to meet this Batman, too. He hadn't met many DCEU superheroes. Besides Clark, he had only met Martian Manhunter disguised as a human general in Wonder Woman Diana, and that meeting wasn't exactly friendly. He hadn't met the rest, the Flash, Aquaman, Cyborg, Batman, and so on. Beyond that, David was curious, which version of Clark was this? He knew the man before him was the Toilet Warrior, but there were actually different versions of this Toilet Warrior Superman, which held implications for the subsequent plot developments in each world. Among other things, the upcoming Steppenwolf would be distinctly different due to its different versions. Mama's Boy Wolf? Or Homecoming Wolf? Let's make an appointment with that Mr. Bruce Wayne. David agreed to meet Batman, and upon learning that he was waiting, he decided to go immediately. Meanwhile, he remembered, is Clark currently focused on being Superman in his own world? Or has he found another job? No, besides being Superman, Clark either returns home to be with his mother or his girlfriend, Lois. The rest of his time is spent farming in Winterfell. He doesn't have time for anything else. Aren't you going to try Tony's suggestion, start a company? Yeah, David felt that if Clark was willing to contribute advanced technologies to help Earth's human development and progress, Batman would be the first to invest in Clark. You just found the biggest financial backer. I'll consider it. The three of them landed at Castle Glamorgan. David then changed into clothes more suitable for a modern Earth city. When he reappeared, he was wearing sneakers, jeans, a blue plaid shirt, and glasses. Okay, let's go. Clark took in David's outfit. It was indeed a very ordinary and common look. It seemed David didn't need to attract countless attention every time he appeared. After thinking it over, Kara decided to go with the two of them. She had long since discarded her prejudices about Earth. Through Clark's explanations and her interactions in Winterfell, the kind-hearted Kara understood that people are different. Not everyone is evil, and the evil of some shouldn't be lumped together. She had already visited Clark's world in her spare time and met Lois, shopping and buying a lot of things together. While David was changing clothes, Kara also went back to change clothes, and then the three of them came to the DC universe where Clark was, and walked into a coffee shop under Clark's guidance. The coffee shop was not very large, but there was only one person sitting in the shop that should have been bustling, a man with a sturdy build, sitting alone in a booth next to the window, and he stood up when several people walked up to him. David, Bruce Wayne. After seeing the two people shake hands and greet each other, Clark took the opportunity to introduce his cousin Kara, and then several people sat in the booth together, with David and Bruce facing each other. So, What do you want to talk to me about? If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelis. There you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 399 Abelson's Expectations. Ever since the emergence of Superman, Kryptonians, and the Avengers, the supposed cosmic police officers, Batman felt his worldview was severely impacted. For years in Gotham, he dealt with various criminals, encountering at most a few psychopaths. He'd never imagined he'd one day have to worry about threats from space, the ocean floor, or even the gods. Through his investigations, Bruce Wayne found himself frustrated by the sudden transformation of the world. He discovered far more than just these few concerns, discovering the existence of more people with special abilities and those with ulterior motives. With David's appearance and Superman's failure to wreak havoc on Earth with Zod, Batman Bruce Wayne didn't rush to confront Superman. Instead, he conducted a thorough investigation and uncovered Lex Luthor, the mastermind behind the attacks. He also found a wealth of information on superpowers from Lex Luthor. Unfortunately, Luthor had no further information on the so-called Avenger, David. This Avenger, who called himself David and appeared to be an angel, seemed to have vanished completely, untraceable on Earth. After much deliberation, Bruce's only remaining clue was Superman. After all, Superman was now the Avengers' official representative on Earth. After tracking and observing them for a while, Bruce was certain that the Avengers must possess some form of teleportation technology. David and Thor weren't usually on Earth, seemingly only appearing during events like a Kryptonian invasion, consistent with their initial statements to the authorities. While this seemed like good news for Bruce, it was a difficult situation for Batman, who was used to keeping everything under control. Bruce Wayne, tossing and turning day and night, couldn't sleep well. He finally made a decision to go directly to Superman, and then, through Superman Clark, to meet David. He wanted to learn more about Earth and the universe directly from the Avenger who oversaw Earth, but he wasn't sure how to achieve his goal. Bruce Wayne constantly reasoned in his mind, rehearsing every possible line of argument. However, the outcome was beyond his expectations. Contacting Superman was already smooth sailing. This Kryptonian, who grew up on Earth, was surprisingly friendly to him, as if he had known him for a long time. This set Bruce's alarm bells ringing. He suspected he'd already been targeted by the Avengers, unknowingly. When he expressed his desire to meet David, Superman's reaction seemed to confirm his suspicions. By now, meeting David, Bruce was certain he knew him and was fully aware of his methods. This meeting was completely predictable. Was he walking into a trap? 1,000 thoughts raced through his mind as he addressed David's question. I'm deeply curious about the universe, especially those forces that could threaten Earth. The universe is far more vibrant than most people imagine, with as many species as the stars in the night sky, David offered a vague answer. But the universe is vast, and most species have ample room to thrive. So you don't have to worry about an alien fleet suddenly docked outside Earth. Earth holds a unique position in the DC universe. Its location in the universe places it in a relatively desolate and remote area, with few advanced civilizations nearby and few resources. Anyone with even a passing familiarity with DC knows that Earth is the center of the universe, a place watched by countless powerful figures. This has led to a unique situation where weaker civilizations can't reach Earth, mid-level civilizations with space colonizing capabilities look down on it, and higher-level beings, privy to the secrets, dare not easily touch Earth. Of course, this doesn't mean Earth is absolutely safe. If this were Homecoming Wolf's world, then Earth would contain the anti-life equation. Darkseid would undoubtedly attack Earth to obtain it, and the Dark Lord wouldn't care about anything like the center of the universe. Bruce and David chatted for a while. David seemed to say nothing, yet it seemed to say a lot. Bruce learned something from his words. Earth is generally safe. So, your job is easy, not bad. Actually, I don't pay much attention to this area most of the time. Bruce nodded, realizing that David's jurisdiction wasn't limited to Earth. It wasn't surprising that he wasn't usually found on Earth. By the way, is that your superior? After chatting for a while, Bruce suddenly asked. He wasn't the only one who wanted the answer, countless others wanted a definitive answer. He even noticed that Superman, sitting next to him, was looking at David with curiosity. It seemed that this Earth alien named Clark wasn't very familiar with David's background. Little did he know, Clark was simply curious about David's nonsense. There's a saying, heaven and earth are unkind, treating all things like straw dogs. You should understand what that means, right? Chinese. Bruce knew a lot, including Chinese, and he knew the meaning of that saying. You mean, although the actual situation is somewhat different, it's safe to assume that this person wouldn't care about such trivial matters happening in your world. In that person's eyes, this world was no different from countless others. Even if the entire world exploded, it might not be as significant to Bruce as losing a penny. World. Bruce gleaned a wealth of information from David's few words. Not only did he learn about the person's true existence, but he also learned something even more remarkable. His own world was just one of countless other worlds. Parallel universes actually existed. In just a few seconds, Bruce reflected on a multitude of things. David's so-called jurisdiction might even encompass multiple worlds. God exists, but he doesn't intervene. The Avengers have no real connection to that being. After chatting for a while, Bruce slowly realized he didn't need to ask any more questions, as most of his questions could be answered clearly. He'd already learned more than he'd in the previous hour. He knew David currently lived in another world, a continent called Brunia. Winter City was the base of these people, and many people from various worlds lived there. Thor, who had previously accompanied David in his fight against the Kryptonians, was from another world, and so on. At this point in the conversation, Bruce asked straightforwardly if he could visit Winter City. Of course, you can ask Clark for details, David said, as if he'd thought of something, and he was very enthusiastic. This made Bruce wonder if there was some conspiracy or trap. He suddenly didn't want to go to Winter City anymore. In reality, David was thinking of something else. Maggie from the world of The Walking Dead was now settled in Winter City. He wondered what Bruce's reaction would be when he saw Maggie. It would be an interesting scene. By this point, the conversation had pretty much run its course. Clark would have more contact with Bruce and, when the time was right, recruit the old Batman into the multiverse's Avengers. David believed the former Justice League members were all worth recruiting, and he could bring them to the Marvel Universe to cause someday, which would surely be quite a spectacle. Back in Winterfell, David eagerly awaited the excitement. Batman never showed up, but Megatron's new body was completed ahead of schedule. This helicarrier, constructed using cutting-edge technology, slowly ascended to the sky, propelled by its anti-gravity engines. From today on, the Megatron would become Winterfell's most important eyes. Megatron and Soundwave, the Decepticons, would be stationed aboard the helicarrier, monitoring Winterfell and the surrounding area from high altitude and deploying artillery support when needed. With the Megatron officially launched and the Tiran Knights gradually gaining combat effectiveness, David suddenly felt an urge to bring forward the succession ceremony and take over the entire Tiran kingdom this year. Isn't time too tight? Indeed. David and Abelson stood side by side, watching Sophia, who was personally experiencing the light and heavy cavalry systems. Sophia, the leader of the Tiran Knights, demonstrated excellent driving skills, speeding along a track dotted with obstacles on her heavy motorcycle. Just before plunging into a large pit, Sophia's motorcycle suddenly began to transform. In the blink of an eye, it transformed from a motorcycle into a flying skateboard, which Sophia stepped on and carried her over the pit. Sophia then took out her flute multi-purpose rifle and, while flying at high speed, fired several shots at the target to the side. Her movements were smooth and seamless, but unfortunately, all of them missed. The angry Sophia controlled the flying skateboard and flew directly to the target. She raised her rifle and shot at zero distance. After completely smashing the target into pieces, she left with satisfaction and headed to the next area. Abelson looked at his daughter who was having fun helplessly. He found that Sophia became even more jumpy after following David. Is this really okay? In addition, Abelson has always hoped that Sophia can get pregnant with David's child as soon as possible. It would be best if the good news could be announced before the succession ceremony. It's a pity that this silly girl doesn't know how to work hard. You use your excessive energy on David. Maybe you should ask your wife to give this stupid girl more advice? And arrange for some female officials to give Sophia proper guidance? Chapter 400 The Dusk of the Kingdom of Tiran. Sophia, having a great time, was summoned back to the Abelsons for a family dinner. However, upon returning to Castle Glamorgan from her home, she looked troubled. What's wrong? David observed Sophia's bewildered expression. It was like winter vacation ended today, but she hadn't done any homework, and she had no idea how to face her homeroom teacher tomorrow. Seeing David's question, Sophia hesitated, then hesitated, her expression shifting back and forth several times, ultimately uttering no words. Seeing her like this, David knew it was inappropriate to ask. Fortunately, he had plenty of people around him, Eva, Helen, and Laura, who could question Sophia on his behalf. About an hour later, while David was sipping tea and reading in his office, Laura got the answer. Sophia's being pressured by her parents to have a baby. Huh? David paused for a moment before realizing. Wasn't Sophia being pressured to have a baby a disguised way of pressuring him to have one? That's understandable. Both Sophia and you hold special positions, especially with you about to inherit the throne. If Sophia could get pregnant now, Abelson might feel much less pressure, no matter how much he consoled himself or how many excuses he found. The undeniable fact was that Abelson would become the king of the Tiran kingdom. If Sophia could give David an heir, he could still tell himself that the Tiran kingdom still existed, just under a new name. I'm afraid I'll disappoint His Majesty, David said, his hands folded. While he understood her perspective, he simply couldn't solve this problem on his own. As his strength grew, he gained a better understanding of his own body, and he gradually understood why he couldn't successfully produce offspring. But knowing the problem didn't guarantee a solution. Based on the information he currently had, producing a true offspring would be a difficult and arduous undertaking. Let's explain my situation to Sophia. This will indirectly help Abelson stop dwelling on this matter. David glanced at Laura. Though it was just a glance, the two had developed a tacit understanding over the years, and Laura immediately understood David's intention. I'll just talk to Sophia. By the way, should we tell her the truth later? What are you planning to do? Because Sophia's mother, after hearing about your extraordinary talent and incredible fighting prowess, which Sophia couldn't handle, gave her precious daughter a brilliant idea. Rosie learned from her daughter that it wasn't Sophia's lack of effort, but David's brutality. If Sophia had constantly engaged in those kinds of things with David, conceiving or not would likely be a lost cause. After careful questioning, Rosie realized it wasn't Sophia's own lack of fighting prowess. Finally, she understood why the Duke of Glamorgan's numerous women seemed to get along so well without any conflicts. It was because everyone was fed, without fighting. After much deliberation, Queen Rosie came up with a brilliant plan for her daughter: rally her friends and attack together, then wait for the right moment to strike the final blow, striving to maximize gains with minimal losses. This tactic wasn't uncommon. Using a trusted maid would be safer than hiring outsiders, but ordinary maids wouldn't be able to seduce the Duke, so Sophia had to recruit the other women close to David. Sophia was stunned by her mother's suggestion. She wanted to reject that it was absurd, but she couldn't think of a better solution. At least her mother's suggestion sounded plausible. As for the shamefulness, her mother's words, with David's character, this was bound to happen sooner or later, and it might have already happened before you knew it, made it impossible for her to object. Sophia returned to Glamorgan Castle, feeling the need to take the plunge, and confided the situation to Laura, Eva, and Helen, who cared about her. This was also her mother's suggestion. Since everyone had enough meat, they might as well discuss it with the others. Sophia explained the situation directly, not even hiding the fact that it was her mother's idea. Don't say I don't care about you. You could, and then tell Sophia the truth. David looked at Laura speechlessly. You're acting so excited, I find it hard to believe you, but he had to admit, the suggestion was quite appealing. Was this a trick on Sophia? Alice, playing a little prank on family members is a way to strengthen their bond. Sophia took up residence in David's room from that day on. Sophia worked herself to the point of bloating every day, but when Gwen arrived, she was surprised to learn that all her hard work had been for nothing. Realizing she'd been tricked, Sophia vowed to let everyone experience her own suffering, and David and Laura's lives became even happier. Time passed in this chaos. By the time Sophia realized that her so-called revenge would only worsen her suffering and chose to let go of her grudge, the northern plains had already turned lush green. Farmers began their New Year's planting season, and Mark Watney began to wander the northern plains, inspecting the surroundings. The Knights of Tiran and the Winter Legion engaged the elves in the Ironwood Forest. As the battle progressed, the Knights of Tiran gradually mastered the art of fighting in the forest. Under Sylvanus's intense training, hunters mastering arcane energy began to appear in the Tiran Knights. While their numbers were still small, it was a promising start. With the addition of new equipment, officially designated the Northwind Light Armor and the Northwind Heavy Motorcycle, the Tiran Knights began to penetrate the Ironwood Forest, and the battle shifted from an initial stalemate to counterattack. More than half of the Winter Knights Paladins had mastered the Holy Light. Everything was progressing well. David's biggest surprise came when an envoy from Marcus Dudley Morgan, Lord of Iron Tree Keep, stated his position directly. Marcus Dudley Morgan would swear allegiance to the new king, His Majesty David Glamorgan. With less than 6 months left until the autumn deadline, Marcus Dudley Morgan seemed a bit impatient. But as summer approached, more and more envoys from across the Kingdom of Tiran arrived on the northern plains, and David noticed that Marcus Dudley Morgan hadn't arrived much earlier. Strange. Are all the lords of Tiran so tactful? While these envoys didn't directly represent their own lords and express their loyalty to David, their attempts at flattery were still evident. When David officially ascended the throne and began taking over the various territories, these lords would likely offer no resistance to the Winterfell army. Speculators are common in every era, Sutton Stewart said, unsurprisingly, as he saw through their intentions. As a noble of high rank and standing within the Kingdom of Tiran, and the Queen's younger brother, Earl Sutton Stewart was perfectly suited to serve as an envoy. He was responsible for distributing the announcement throughout Tiran. Sutton was well versed in the affairs of the various lords of Tiran, and he saw through the envoys who had come to the northern plains. They were all sent by weak, impoverished lords. Some, even impoverished lords who had lost their territories in previous wars with their neighbors, sought justice from the new king. Lords with vast, fertile territories, ample military forces, or those who had already rebelled, did not come to Winterfell in person or by envoy. Even some lords of lesser strength and in distant locations did not take David, the Duke of Glamorgan, the heir to the throne, seriously. Simply put, even if all the envoys or lords who had come so far swore allegiance to David, their territories would be nothing more than a collection of spots on a map, devoid of practical value and utterly disfiguring. The only lord of true value to the soon-to-be-established Kingdom of Winter is Marcus Dudley Morgan of Iron Tree Keep. The most important lords during the Tiran Kingdom's time were Marcus Dudley Morgan, Marcus Prior and Marcus Ingram Ferber, who guarded the borders. These three marquises ruled Iron Tree Keep in the north, White Rock City in the south, and Dragon Keep in the east, respectively. As for the western part of Tiran, due to the lack of strong enemies and its proximity to the barren Lost Lands, the land itself was not particularly fertile, so several earls ruled. Beyond that, several earls surrounding the capital were of greater importance, and these earls also did not send envoys to the northern plains. White Rock City in the south had already been captured by the Temple. Marcus Dudley Morgan of Iron Tree Keep in the north had clearly pledged his allegiance. Marcus Ferber, who ruled in the east, remained silent. His thoughts remained unknown. When Sutton Stewart delivered the letter, he didn't even get to meet the Marcus. It was said he was away suppressing rebellions in the surrounding areas. This Marcus Ferber, the rebellion you're most interested in suppressing is actually me, right? Sutton smiled but said nothing. Although he often came across as unreliable, he knew when to joke and when to remain silent. His survival wasn't solely due to his birth and bloodline. Of course, it would be wonderful if he could take some time off for Sophia's sake. Unfortunately, that wasn't possible. Although he was deputy commander of the Tiran Knights and the de facto commander, all members of the Tiran Knights currently in training were under the command of Sylvanus, and Earl Sutton Stewart was no exception. Next, he would return to the barracks for another round of training. Sutton wasn't going to slack off. The day of Winterfell's counterattack on the Temple was approaching, and he wanted to be the first to storm White Rock. End of this chapter. Thank you very much for reaching the end. Don't forget to like. Looking for more exclusive content and immediate access? Subscribe to our Patreon. Remember, every like, subscription, or donation encourages us to continue. Thanks to everyone, see you in the next video.